All of these things with the Israelis for 6-7 months during the genocide. At that point, people said, at least better late than never. But then the Middle East Eye reported that what was happening was Turkish companies were going to Greece, docking, changing the flag, then going to the Israelis. Something that people believe Erdogan must have known about. When Erdogan found out about it afterwards, the announcement was there would be more crackdowns on what's taking place. But instead, what Middle East Eye exposed later, or Monitor, one of the two, is that the Turkish companies were exporting to Palestinian Authority a huge increase in exports to Palestinian Authority, but they were basically using it as a conduit to the Israelis. And I think that describes Erdogan's position, in that I have a population to appease, but I don't want to go too far with the Israelis. I have a population to try to keep quiet, and I will do what's necessary to keep them, or do within what I can do to keep them quiet. I'm trying to balance between the anger of my Muslim population, the anger of the Turks, and between my desire to keep good ties with the Israelis. I'm trying to keep the Turks on board with me, who are really angry over Gaza, while ensuring that I can keep the Israelis on board, because I need them to help me with the Americans so I can look after my economy. Some Erdogan supporters have said, what do you expect Erdogan to do? One of the largest oil supplies that is going to Israel is through the Ceyhan pipeline that the Azerbaijanis are transporting. It goes through Turkey. Turkey has enough influence over Azerbaijan to tell them we want to stop this oil going towards the Israelis. Erdogan doesn't dare touch it. You know, the same way that we talk about the Arab states, do something, you have power to do so. Erdogan is intentionally trying to avoid using any of that leverage against the Israelis, because he fears the repercussions of standing against the Israelis, that they will bring everyone to bear down on Turkey, that Saudi might join them, UAE might join them, etc. He might feel abandoned. The Americans might add to the economic crisis. This is not the time, Erdogan believes, for me to be seen to be too close to the Palestinians at the expense of my relations with the Israelis. Erdogan, if you remember at the beginning, kicked out Hamas very quickly over what happened. Then when he thought negotiations were going really well, he invited Hamas back to Ankara. Then when the negotiations failed, and instead the talk went to how Palestinian Authority might be able to be a peacekeeping force in Gaza, he invited Mahmoud Abbas to the Turkish parliament to give a speech, and a big applause was given to Mahmoud Abbas. The reactionary approach of Erdogan shows there is no clear plan here. There's no proactive plan. As far as Erdogan is concerned, he wants to ride this out as best as possible. Give enough to the Turks to keep them comfortable, and give the Israelis enough to make sure they don't punish me instead. And that's the heartbreaking thing about what's happening in Turkey. The one thing that is worth noting is that Erdogan's reputation has plummeted. And many Turks have been surprised by that. But one of the things that is worth noting is, when you think about it, Erdogan came to power in 2003, but did not really make a name for himself in the Muslim world until 2010, when he went to the Davos Forum and stood up in front of Shimon Peres. You remember the 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, and stormed out. And that went viral. Everybody said, this Erdogan, mashallah. Then came the Arab Spring, where the whole international community stood against it, but he stood for it, even against the coups. So people said, mashallah, he's standing up for what's right, even though he's going to pay a price for it. And then he held on to that. The point being is, Gaza and Palestine propelled him to the popularity that he enjoys in the Muslim world. Not his economic. The economic stuff reinforced that popularity, but the popularity came through his position and stance on Palestine. And it appears that the sense that he is not standing with the Palestinians as he should is resulting in that plummeting as well. But Erdogan's considerations, if you put yourself in his position, is, what am I supposed to do? What can I do? If I turn off the pipeline, I will be brutally punished by the Americans and the like, and by the Europeans, and I will not be able to resist them. So it's better that I allow the oil to go to the Israelis, let them do the genocide. It's not my responsibility. I will try. If all the Muslims gather together, we'll stand with them. If they're not gathered together, then each to their own, and we make dua, and we hope that our population is sympathetic to the Palestinians anyway, and that will suffice for us, and maybe that will count for us instead. It's not that Erdogan is Machiavellian. It's that Erdogan believes he has no power to deploy against the Israelis. I believe he does, but he believes that the price he will pay for it is too great, and it will compromise everything that he's achieved. But I argue that the reason that he became so popular is because of the stances that he took, that were brave and counter to what pragmatism would call for. And perhaps pragmatism might make him lose that popularity in a way that might jeopardize, in point being, him not standing with Gaza when it needs it the most is what might cost him his legacy.
Can we turn to US politics? Now, you've just come back from the United States, and you spend a lot of your time now, it seems, in the United States, Sami. You've been quite involved in communicating how Muslims should approach the presidential elections, which are coming up, of course, later this year in November. Kamala Harris seems to have turned around some of the fortunes of the Democrats after Biden's lackluster approach, but also his stance on Gaza. Is the deal now sealed for the Democrats? Is it possible they are now going to win this? And so the Harris is not that concerned about the Gaza vote that Biden was concerned about?
I think it's a bit more complicated than that.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair. Hi. Why do we need unity between Sunni and Shia?
We don't. Yes, it is a difficult subject. By the way, it has been always a difficult subject in our history. If the enemies are using this, then we are stupid. Definitely, Iran had done miserable acts in our ummah. I cannot blame every Shia in the world for what Iran does. Why should I impose upon you my belief or my fiqh? I believe that we can live peacefully together. We can build a civilization together.
What you suggest requires a major cultural shift.
It does.
Intellectual shift.
It does.
How long is this going to take? The Sunni-Shia divide remains an open wound and a means by which our enemy meddle in our internal affairs. Since the war on terror and the horrible sectarianism unleashed on Iraq, this divide has got even bigger and has often led to bloody violence. However, amidst this turmoil, we often hear voices from within the Ummah and beyond, dreaming of unity to confront the misery, humiliation, and suffering of the oppressed, especially in the current situation with Palestine. But it's a really difficult topic. There are a host of theological and political concerns, and the current tussle between Saudi Arabia and Iran makes any talk of reconciliation or an overlapping consensus something that is really politically charged. Now, I've invited back onto the show Dr. Tariq Soidan to navigate this really difficult matter. Dr. Soidan, as you know, is a regular of our show, alhamdulillah, and is a prolific writer, a speaker and trainer, and in many ways has brought much needed intellectual thought to our contemporary age. Now, Dr. Soidan, Jazakallah khair, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Now, I think this is a really difficult topic, I have to say, and my mind is full of lots and lots of ideas. So I apologize in advance if the conversation is very open and candid.
Yeah, sure. And I love candid and difficult subjects.
Well, in my introduction, Dr. Soidan, I mentioned the case of Iraq. And it is clear for sure that under Saddam Hussein, the Shias were persecuted and were oppressed. And there was mass killing of Shia. And we have to recognize that this was persecution. But at the same time, after the 2003 American-led invasion, when the Iraqi Shias were in the ascendancy, there was a bloody sectarian war that took place, and Sunnis died in great numbers.
That's true.
Many believe that that was a watershed. Any belief before then of creating unity was somewhat dissolved by just the anger and hatred that this persecution, which still remains in many quarters, this persecution created. How would you see that event?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Thank you, Ya Akhi Jalal, for inviting me and being with your audience again. Yes, it is a difficult subject. By the way, it has been always a difficult subject in our history.
Yeah.
And these bloody wars are not new. Our history is full of them. So we have to look at the whole subject in a more careful, intellectually and historically and politically. So let me go back to history.
Yeah.
And then I'll come back to this. In our history, the divide started very early on. It started in the year 40 of Hijrah, which is more than 1,400 years ago. And it started, as well, it's well known, in the Battle of Siffin between Muawiyah and Ali. And that divided, by the way, it didn't divide Shia and Sunnah. It divided Shia of Ali, which is the supporters of Ali, against Shia of Muawiyah, the supporters of Muawiyah. That's what Shia means,
Yeah.
supporters. With time, the word Shia was termed for those who follow a certain sect. And by the way, it is not one sect. Inside it, there are different sects. You see the Ja'faris, you see the Zaydis. At a certain time, the Ismailis were part of that sect, and they diverted out of Islam. But again, it was not only one sect. And the Ja'faris are those who believe in 12 Imams. 11 of them has already appeared, and the 12th have disappeared, and they're waiting for him to come back. But that is not the belief of the Zaydis, which are the Shi'at of Yemen. They don't believe in Mahdi and coming or so on. And they don't believe in the 12 Imams, and they are Shia. And now they are closer to the two, because of the effect of Iran. They became affected by the Ja'faris. But most of the people of the Shi'at of Yemen are Zaydis. They are not Ja'faris. And there are, as I said, other major sects within the Shia. Now, to understand them, you have to understand history. Otherwise, you will not know what is the difference. And the divide became bigger and bigger until the time of Harun al-Rashid, when his son, al-Ma'mun, came into power. So after Harun al-Rashid, al-Amin, after al-Amin, his brother, al-Ma'mun. There was a huge war between al-Amin and al-Ma'mun over power, and al-Amin lost. So al-Ma'mun took over. Al-Ma'mun did something very strange in our history that most people don't know. Every ruler of the Abbasids or the Umayyads would choose his son to be his successor. He did not. Al-Ma'mun did not. Whom did he choose? He chose Ali al-Rida, who is one of the 12 Imams of the Shia. He was one of, I think, the 9th Imam of the Shia also. So he chose him to be the crown prince, and he became the crown prince. So for a period of our time, we were united. And it was an easy unity, because now this is the leader of the Muslim Sunnis, political leader, agreeing with the political and spiritual and scholarly leader of the Shia, the one Imam, the Imam of the Shia, Ali al-Rida, who is the descendant of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu. He became a crown prince, and he was going to rule. But unfortunately, he died before al-Ma'mun. So al-Ma'mun chose someone else. But that was done in our history.
Yes.
That most people don't know. So it is, if there is a political will, if there is, if there are open-minded scholars, we can do it. But we have to look deeply into the issue. Now, saying that, it doesn't mean that everything is fine.
Yes.
Yes, I am optimist, but at the same time, I realize what's going on ground.
Yeah.
Definitely, Iran had done miserable acts in our ummah. They did miserable things in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and in the Arabian Gulf.
Yeah.
This is reality. And they oppressed the Muslim Sunnis in Iran itself.
Yeah.
So if they want unity, let's start with their own people. So we have optimism. We know the religious part, the scholarly part, and we know the history part. But there is a way.
Mm.
There is a way to fill the gap. And we can discuss that if you want in details.
Yeah, I think we will discuss that in a lot of detail. It seems to me that with all those conflicts you mentioned, it's not just that Iran is involved in those conflicts, but in many ways there is what some would call like a Shia exceptionalism. In other words, the ideology that's fueling a lot of the leaders of this conflict is the idea that the Shia state, the Shia component or sect should have primacy. We saw that in Yemen in particular, should have primacy over Sunnis. In other words, there should not be a symmetric relationship or a brotherly relationship. Comment on that, and how do you overcome this very sort of deep, I hate to call it sectarianism always, but it's a deep sectarianism.
It is sectarian.
Yeah.
It is sectarian.
Yeah.
And definitely this sectarianism is what's fueling the Irani leadership.
Yes.
That is different.
Right.
By the way, I have visited Iran and met with the leadership of Iran. I went to their religious city, Qum. I have been to Iraq.
Yes.
I met with the leaders of the Shia in Iraq and the religious leaders of the Shia. I went to Lebanon.
Yeah.
I met with Hassan Nasrallah and Hussein Fadlallah. So Hassan Nasrallah himself, I sat with him for several hours and so on. So I know. I know how they think. I know what fuels them. So, by the way, first of all, let's make it very clear, very, very clear. Not all the Shia follow Iran.
Right.
So don't equate Iran and Shia.
Right.
They are not the same thing. The Shia have what they call a marja. To understand how this system works.
Mm-hmm.
The Shia are different than the Sunnah in many ways, but one of the major ways is that they call what they call a marja. A marja is a reference.
A spiritual leader.
It's not only spiritual. He has to be a leader in Sharia, which means I, as a Sunni, I don't have a specific scholar that I must follow. And if I'm not convinced, say, of Tariq Suwaidan's opinions, I can go to someone else.
Yeah.
The Shias cannot. They cannot.
Yes.
They have to follow one of the scholars.
Yeah.
Now they have in the whole world 7, not 1. So they have 7 in the whole world. Among the major ones, Khamenei in Iran and Sistani in Iraq. Sistani doesn't follow Khamenei, and Khamenei doesn't follow Sistani, and they both don't follow a certain one. So, and this is a huge difference among the Shia themselves.
Yeah. So
please don't look at the Shia as one thing. They are not one thing.
Yeah.
And the crimes that Iran does is not the crimes of the Shia. It's the crimes of Iran. That's how we should look at it. Yes, it's fueled by sectarianism or whatever. It might be political expansion. I don't care. It is a crime.
Yeah.
But I cannot take, say, one of my daughters in Iraq that was trained by me, who's a lovely, pious Shia girl, and think of her as part of this crime. She is not. She disagrees with it. She disapproves with it. She disapproves, by the way, with many things that even the ignorant Shia do. Now, there are ignorant people within the Sunnis and ignorant people within the Shia.
Yeah.
And ignorant people do ridiculous things, like slapping themselves for what happened 1400 years ago.
Yes.
That is nonsense to me, sorry. But this is their belief, it's up to them.
Yeah.
Now, this Shia girl, who is well trained in Sharia, according to the Shia sect,
yes,
does not approve of this. And she thinks that this is ignorant. So now, when we look at the whole picture, then Iran is not the Shia politically. Iran is not the Shia Islamically. So Iran is the criminal hand in our ummah. So Iran does ridiculous things politically, and it reaches crimes, but I cannot blame every Shia in the world for what Iran does. I cannot. This is injustice.
So in the same way, I suppose we can't blame the Sunnis, for the actions of the Arab dictatorships.
Okay, definitely.
So you're suggesting...
I always say something, Jalal.
Yeah.
Say, listen, in our history, we became backward. And in our history is not always clean. Our history is full of crimes. Wallah, wallah, wallah. I have nothing to do with these crimes.
Yes. Yeah.
I came into the world, I inherited this history. I came into the world, I inherited this backwardness. I am not part of it. I'm not the cause of it.
Yeah.
So you cannot blame me for what the Sunnis have done in their history. I do not approve of these crimes. I do not approve of Abu al-Abbas al-Saffah, the founder of the Abbasis, when he killed everyone that stood in his way. That was crimes. I do not approve of that. So don't blame me for that. And the same way, to have justice, I cannot blame every Shia for every crime that Iran does.
Dr. Suwaidan, you called for some form of unity. I want to get to the crux of how we establish that unity. But before I do so, maybe a more fundamental question is why? Why do we need unity between Sunni and Shia?
We don't. We don't need unity. Yeah, akhi, let's look at the whole thing. See, one day I was invited to a debate in a Shia mosque, or it was actually a library.
Yeah.
And the discussion was this issue: the relations between sects. So I was very frank, and let me be frank with you here too.
Yes.
I said, look, I was talking to my Shia friends. I said, look, we Sunnis, wallah, we have tried to get rid of you throughout history by force.
Yes.
We did not succeed. And by the way, you tried to get rid of us by force. You did not succeed. We tried to oppress you when we are in power, like in the Umayyads and Abbasis. Definitely, the Shias were oppressed. And you oppressed the Sunnis when you took over. For example, in the Fatimid rule, which was, and by the way, not the Ja'fari rule, it was an Ismaili rule. So we did not succeed, we did not succeed. So we isolated ourselves from each other. So you lived in your own areas and we lived in our own areas. And with time, we became more ignorant of each other. And we hated each other more and more because we are ignorant about each other. And so all of these we have tried and we did not succeed. So let's live together. Ya akhi, what is the problem in living together? Meaning that let's forget about sects. Sects here relate to your belief, your worship. Do it the way you want.
Yeah.
Why should I impose upon you my belief or my fiqh? I would not. Ya akhi, you worship Allah the way you want. You follow any scholar you want. It's up to you.
Yeah.
Now, when we live in a same country, let's build it together, not against each other. Let's build it together. When we vote for a political nominee, let's look at their qualification, not at their sect. Let's see what they can bring to us. What is the benefit of electing a political leader because he's Sunni and corrupt and leaving aside a clean Shia? What would the whole country benefit out of that? So I do not look for unity, akhi, because we tried this, but with all ways. I don't believe that it is possible, but I believe that we can live peacefully together. We can build a civilization together, and we can retrain our ummah to choose the best without looking at the sect. And we can retrain the ummah to not impose their worship or belief on someone else. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah.
So I'm not looking for unity because I don't believe that it's possible.
You're calling for some sort of overlapping consensus so that we can live together and not create unnecessary disunity within our countries and within the Muslim Ummah.
I have trained, because I'm a trainer, as you know.
Yeah.
I have trained many Shia.
Yeah.
And some of my students, boys and girls, who are Shia, very devoted Shia, are very lovely people, really lovely. And they respect me and they love me, and I do love them. So now, let's look at this relationship. They still are Shia, they are still devoted, they don't follow me scholarly, but they respect me and they benefit from me in the areas that I'm good at. This is the relationship that I look for. I wish that this will spread all over.
So is that how we do it? We create that relationship on a micro level and we hope for it to spread, or are there other techniques?
No. Micro level will never see. We fix one and we lose 1,000. So it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It has to be also on a macro level,
right?
Meaning that major scholars should get together, hold hands together, pray together, talk in front of the audience together.
Yeah.
That happened, by the way, in 1980. Major scholars, including Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, met in Jordan, and they made a declaration that still stands.
Amman Declaration.
Yes. Amman Declaration. And in the declaration, there's many issues, but this issue was major part of it. It says, who are the Muslims? Who are the Muslim sects?
Yeah.
So they approved of 8. They said, these are the Muslim sects: Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali, Zahiri, which was the madhab of Al-Andalus, which is not present today, but
Yeah.
there are few people who adhere to it.
Mhm.
But that is also Islamic. Ja'fari, which is in Iraq and Iran and many other places. Zaydi, which is a Shia of Yemen. And Abadi, which is not Shia, not Sunnah, found in Oman and in North Africa. All of these are true Muslims. I'm saying this because that's what I believe in. I'm saying this because that was the declaration of the major scholars. And I'm saying this because I have heard, unfortunately, some question whether the Shias are Muslim or not.
So how do you answer this question? Because
They
it
are
is quite
Muslims, definitely they're Muslims, no question, no hesitation.
Yes.
They are Muslims. Yes, I differ with them in issues that are major, not only minor. I am very clear about this.
Yes.
I differ with them on major issues, but I do not differ with them in issues that will make them Muslims or not.
Right.
So they are Muslims.
How about in response to the follow-on from that, there are some Muslims who really object to some Shia, not all Shia, some Shia who abuse maybe or the Sahaba Ridwan al-Alayh, or they make comments, derogatory comments against our really important companions. I mean, how does one navigate that?
First of all, that is a common practice among most Shia.
Right.
So it's not something abnormal.
Really.
And this is not something that is only done by the few.
Yeah.
It is done by the majority. Now, do they do it in public or do they do it private? That is the difference. Now, that is not the opinion of all Shia. I have met with Hussein Fadlallah, rahimahullah ta'ala. Hussein Fadlallah is one of the 7 major references for the Shia. I was myself in his office. We raised this issue. Wallahi, ya akhi, wallahi, wallahi, 3 times. Every time he mentions Abu Bakr and Umar, he says, radiyallahu anhuma. And I was with 30 of my students. So before we left, I asked him this. I said, Sheikh Hussein, I heard that you are a poet. He said, yes. So can I hear one of your poems? I was sitting next to him. See, he opens the drawers, takes a paper, and there is poetry that is being corrected. So still underwriting. That's why I saw it, because I was next to him. What is this poem, ya akhi? It was the praise of Aisha. Of course, that will not be done by the Shiite of Iran.
Yeah.
But there are Shia who believe in this.
Yeah.
There are Shia who believe that it is haram to curse the companions. Now, what is our stand on this issue? It is haram, definitely, to curse the companions. But it is not kufr.
Right.
It's not kufr.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, if this is their opinion and their practice, let them meet Allah with it. And if there is some sin in it, they will be punished for it. And then they will, ya akhi, it is very simple how to deal with this issue. I am not a judge. I'm a da'iyah. I'm not a judge.
Yes.
So I tell them my opinion. I advise them. Don't judge them. Allah will judge them. So it is haram. It is unacceptable. But it is between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. See, I look at it even bigger than this. Yeah. I tell a joke about this. So let me tell you this joke. I'm not sure whether it's true or not, but they say that there was a brother in America who had a friend who was a Christian friend, a white American Christian friend.
Yes.
And he was calling him to Islam. That white American Christian friend was interested. So he was very interested in Islam, but he was not a Muslim yet. So he said to his friend, "Can I visit the masjid?" He said yes. So he takes him to the masjid. When they enter, there's a huge quarrel by voice between two groups in Arabic. So this American doesn't understand. So he asks his friend, he said, "What are they quarreling about?" He said, "This group supports Abu Bakr, and this group supports Ali to be the ruler." So the American said, "When is the election? And where will it be held?" And his friends, he said, no, this has happened already 1400 years ago. Said, "Are these people crazy to fight about something that already happened?" Yeah, it happened. Khalas, it finished. When Sayyidina Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal was asked about an issue of the quarrel between the companions, he said, there is a verse in the Quran says, "تلك أمة قد خلت لها ما كسبت ولكم ما كسبتم ولا تسألون عما كانوا يفعلون." It's a generation that has passed. They gained what they did, and you will gain what you do. And you will not be asked about what they have done. This is in the Quran. So I will not be asked about the quarrel of the companions. But if I curse them, why should I curse anyone? I mean, a question to my friends who are Shia. What is the benefit of cursing? What will the Ummah get? Will we become better? Will we become united? Are we going to be stronger? What is the benefit? Now, if you believe in it deeply, no, it's up to you. You will meet Allah with it. And it's a sin that you will be judged with. I will not judge you. But please, don't do it in front of me, because that will agitate me. And I will not be quiet. And then we will have a quarrel. So why should you agitate your Sunni friends? So this is simple. So if they truly, strongly believe in it, it's between them and Allah. But please don't agitate the Sunnah, because there's no benefit in it.
Some will say that you're being idealistic here. I mean, the divisions that exist at present in the Muslim Ummah is so great, and this anger is palpable sometimes between the two sides. And of course, there's the politics that's involved in this as well, in the mix. Because what you suggest requires a major cultural shift.
It does.
Intellectual shift.
It does.
How long is this going to take?
Let it take a century.
Really?
I mean, if we don't start it,
yes,
it will never happen. Let it start. Let's start with one person.
Yes.
Let it take a century. But at least we have started something that will change the future. Yeah. If you look at any social changes or political changes in history, how did they happen? With one person. They always happen with one person. How did Marxism happen? With one person. How did the French Revolution happen? With the thinkers. So one thinker, and then another, and then another, and then some people believe in it, and it starts to spread, and let it take time. But at least we'll start something. Let me ask you the opposite question. This is a problem. Does it have a solution? Will we ever solve it? So does those who ask this question say it is unsolvable? I don't believe it's unsolvable. I do believe it's huge. I do believe it will take a long time. I do believe it's very idealistic. I do believe in that. But I do believe that social changes and political changes start with an idea. Always start with an idea.
Yeah.
So this is just an idea, food for thought to be thought about.
Jazakallah khair. Can I ask you also about the consequence of not changing this? Because it seems to me that our enemies use this division between us to cause greater schisms within our ummah. How much is that part of your calculation?
If the enemies are using this, then we are stupid.
Yeah.
It's not the fault of our enemies. This is frankly, if I was the enemy, I would use it. But it would be our stupidity to let our enemies use it.
Yeah.
So again, I hope that people understand me. I do not believe that Sunnis and Shias will disappear. I don't believe, and I'm not calling for that. I don't believe that one day this will go away and disappear. That is too idealistic. But I do believe that we can live peacefully together and build a civilization together and have Iran stop this stupidity of creating sectarianism everywhere and causing wars between Shia and Sunni. This is stupid and this is criminal. So I disapprove of it, and I know what they're doing, and I'm totally against them. So let's stop this and let's start to think as an ummah, which means let the Shia worship the way they want, let the Sunni worship the way they want, but let's build a civilization together. So that's so I'm not calling for unity. I don't think that this will disappear. That is too idealistic. But I do believe that we can reach an agreement to live peacefully.
Dr. Tariq Suwaidan, I think that's a really thoughtful conversation. Jazakallah khair for your time today.
It's my pleasure and honor to be with you. And I hope I have added at least an inception. There is a film called The Inception.
Inception, yes.
Inception is that you throw a seed in the mind of somebody and let it grow.
Yeah.
I hope my ideas are creating an inception in the Muslim Ummah, inshallah.
Inshallah ta'ala, I hope they do. And I think this is very much needed.
Inshallah.
Barakallah fi.
Hayyakum Allah. Shukran lak. Thank you so much. Barakallah.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.
Muslims not being intellectually brave enough. Historians ought to be future orientated because the way that time operates in Islam is not linear.
We're looking at history in the wrong way.
The smallest strip in the world at the moment is literally bringing down a hegemonic empire. So decline does no longer exist in the Western Maya. So in Islam, everything is cyclical. Allah Ta'ala in the Quran, he talks about, and those who think, and those who contemplate, and those who listen. You become desensitized and conditioned into becoming a secular agent, even though you call yourself Muslim, because we have the resources, we have the human capital, we have the minds. It's not like it doesn't exist, but we're stuck.
It is said a people without a past are a lost soul. And in today's turbulent world, the Muslim Ummah has come to realize that we have, in many cases, been taught a version of history that fails to appreciate what the late Dr. Shadeer Akhtar called Islam as an imperial faith. In fact, our appreciation of Islamic history remains poor, or we see it as nothing more than a story to tell our children. My guest argues that history needs to take in a discussion about our future, and that historians are as important as traditional Islamic scholars. I have the pleasure to invite back onto the show Dr. Yaqub Ahmed. Dr. Yaqub is an academic specializing in late Islamic and Ottoman history. He has until recently lectured in Islamic history at Istanbul University, He's a regular to his podcast and writes and lectures extensively on Ottoman history. He's the author of a soon-to-be published title, Does History Matter? History Done Islamically, which will be the basis of our conversation today. Dr. Yaqub Ahmed, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to the Thinking
Alaikum
Muslim.
assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair, thank you for joining us. Now, in the introduction, I probably mentioned some controversial points. And one point I mentioned is what Dr. Shabir Ahmed called Islam, an imperial faith, which was a very controversial title, I remember, when he published his book. I mean, do you agree with that?
Things have not changed still. And because of the current predicament, I have then came with this concept of writing this book. And so the questions you kind of pose, I'm just going to address a few of them because they are something that has gone through my mind as well.
Do you mean Gaza in terms of predicament?
I think specifically Gaza has, clearly for me as a academic historian and maybe a pseudo thinker, it's made me realize that I think we are not, as Muslims, not being intellectually brave enough. I think we have been quite intellectually submissive or passive perhaps. And I think if there is a body, and you know, this extends out prior to Gaza. I mean, there's been what's happened with the so-called Arab Spring and Muslims in various parts of the world. And I think the sort of like solutions that we were trying to provide, if we can call them solutions, have not been sufficient in regards to trying to create a creative third space. It's been very much status quo, solution-orientated way of thinking. And Gaza sort of made me re-examine that because as I was going through the history books, and we can talk about this later, I sort of make the argument that Gaza is Badr-esque in the way that it's being sort of like played out. The smallest strip in the world at the moment, in my mind, for all the hardship it's facing, is literally bringing down a hegemonic empire. Now, how long that will be, Allah knows best. But the idea is that the reason why I say Badr-esque is not just simply because it's a conflict, but because the notion of Badr is to obey Allah, obey the Messenger, and so forth. And the idea of the sort of like nature of the people of Badr, the sort of like characteristics that they display, the sort of patience and against all the odds sort of reality that Badr sort of represented. And not only that, but the sort of like moral after Badr, which is the idea that, you know, that Muslims have an expectation to be particularly upright. So what's unique about that is that it also resonates, and we'll talk about this probably later, about the idea of history rhyming and the notion of Dawood alayhi salam and Jalut. So there is a particular theme that we see throughout the tradition of Islamic history, of this sort of like moments that these contingency moments, which I call that appear, that sort of are a sort of wake up moment. And for me, Gaza has left me very disheartened and optimistic simultaneously. And the fact that as a thinker, I've started to think that I need to be more vociferous and vocal in calling out the genocide for what it is. It is a genocide. But also as a Muslim, try to provide a sort of more solution-orientated alternative from the repository, which I call the Islamic historical past, and say, okay, look, what do I have that I can add to the conversation? What is it that I know that I can put on the table and say, you know, we've gone through these particular moments. What have been the outcomes? Or have we gone through these particular moments? Is this specifically unique? And so forth. And then say, you know, look, now's not the time to be afraid and cower. I mean, if I'm making the argument that the people of Gaza are reflecting some sort of tradition or culture or manifestation of Badr, then the requirement is do I want to be part of that sort of like greater process? Do I want to be included in that sort of like relationship with Allah Ta'ala of trying to show humanity of an alternative? And I believe that I need to be intellectually braver. I need to write far better in terms of what I'm providing in regards to solutions to this ummah. And I may not be rich. I may not be the strongest person in the world, but I say this categorically, alhamdulillah, my mother never raised a coward. So I am a little bit disappointed firstly myself, and then in Muslims around me who are of a similar disposition, who are privileged to be writers and thinkers and intellectuals and so forth, who haven't, one, been brave enough to try to galvanize the community in a way which I think can be solution orientated, and two, the solutions that we are proposing at the moment are just not good enough. Now, we could turn around and say, we don't know. That's okay. It's okay to be collectively shocked and traumatized to the point that the sloganeering that we put on the table is not sufficient. So, you know, it's easy for Muslims to make the case that Islam is the solution, or the Khilafah is the solution, or the Sharia is the solution. But that solution that you put on the table has to have something tangible that people can make sense of. That's where I would argue that my job now comes in, when I'm saying, okay, how do I make that imaginable for you as an alternative? How do I think of, or what do I imagine as possibilities post Gaza? What do I envisage how this will all pan out, how this looks like, and so forth. And so for me, I think as Muslims, we have to be, and this platform is, alhamdulillah, a good platform for that, in the sense that we have to be more vocal in debating and discussing amongst ourselves regarding the differences, in fact, and accepting the fact that we have these differences of opinion, but the only way we're going to find some level of synergy is to put it out there on the open. So that's what's driven me in that sense. And now, regards to your point, because I just did go off topic a little bit. I think 2 points before I go to Shabir Ahmed, which is, I don't think that history is a central form in regards to vocation, because some people may accuse me as a historian of just, defending my vocation. But I do believe it is, in the past, amongst Muslims, it was a vocation which was not only complementary, but supplementary to the framework of Ulumuddin. The ulama were historians. Ibn Khaldun is an example of that. Al-Tabari is an example of that. Ibn Ishaq is an example of that. The ulama understood, and this is interesting because Mustafa Sabri Effendi, the Sheikh al-Islam of the Ottoman Empire, and he preferred certainty. And he said, where the problem lies with the vocation of history is how do you determine that certainty. Now, the uniqueness about history is that it's an interpretive vocation. It's a vocation in which interpretation is required as part of what we do. So, for example, one of my concerns is when I see sort of like history being done on the internet, and we call this bullet point history, right? Which is this, or PowerPoint history, which is this, and this.
Yeah.
And that type of history has a particular place, but what happens here is when that history is being done is it's presented as if it's factual.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit troublesome itself, because is history actually a science, or is it a different type of vocation? It's interpretive in the fact that the Ottoman Empire collapses in 1924. That's factual.
Yeah.
But if I said to you, Abdul Hamid II is a good man, that's not factual at all. That's now interpretive.
Right.
Irrespective of the evidences, there's an interpretive component here. But I believe that vocation of thinking, that consciousness that's created in that style of thinking, is necessary in both the alim and the non-alim, for Muslims in general. I think that needs to be put on the table as a way of thought. And so that's why I think history needs to be done better. And I don't think we're doing a good job of it. And I can say that quite confidently because I've been doing the circuit now for a long time. And I'm seeing the questions that parents are asking me. I'm seeing the questions that people are asking me in the masajis, in the madrasas. And then I've been teaching in the academic space itself. So for here, that's one. The second thing is, no doubt, I believe it's important in that sense. And this is why one of the things I want to encourage is that how do we incorporate that in our curricula in a way that can be informative and move away from this kind of sloppy bullet point way of writing history and make it more in terms of it being thought-provoking. So now going to your point about Shabir Ahmed, I understand the point he's trying to make. Whether he was deliberately being a provocateur or not, I'm not sure. But historically, there's enough evidence to show that at least in the center of what we call the Muslim world, there has been an imperial component in the way that politics has been practiced. And as a consequence of that, the imperial culture has had a particular manifestation in terms of the various ways that the power configurations, and this would be the power at the top, and you can call this a khilafah for now if you want, or the sultanate, or whatever it may be in any given time. The ulama and then the ummah as a whole, how this triangle has sort of interacted with each other to sort of like represent the imperial culture. But I wouldn't use that particular term. I think I'm more closely aligned to someone like Naqib al-Atas in Malaysia, or Armando Salvatore, who's a sociologist of Islam, in which he says Islam historically is a tradition of civility, right? And I think Atas calls it adab. The idea that the notion of Amr bin Ma'ruf and Nahy al-Munkar, or even in the Jama, the Inna Allaha ya'muru bil adli wa ihsan, the idea of goodness and justice, the idea of enjoying good and staying away from that which is not, is infused in the culture of Islam to the point that all factions of the hierarchy are compelled to adhere to this general principle.
Right.
And that principle can be seen from the local village to imperial politics at any given time. And that sort of like recognition that there is a superior canopy, which is Allah Ta'ala, which judges you in this life and the next, has consistently created a civilization of this adab or civility that we can see. And that's then manifested in the arts, in the architecture, in the way that people behave, the morality, the ethics, and so forth. And so the reason why I'm reluctant to just simply talk about the imperial component, because Islam has manifested outside the Ottoman domains, outside the Abbasid and Umayyad domains, outside the domains of Andalusia. Africa is a Muslim continent in that sense, and we can go all the way to stretch to other parts of the world, and we'll see Islam sort of like internalized in that way. And so I like that sort of like conceptualization that they've put forward. It sort of is in agreement with me in the way that when I look at Islam as a civilization, and I make this point because at times I've been disappointed when people have tried to point out that a particular leader was a tyrant or a butcher or so forth. And by doing that, what you do is you sort of make the case that we are no different than anyone else. And I make the case that we are different, actually, in fact, because Islam is different. And fundamentally, Islam manifested over 1400 years. You see a consistency. So yes, Muslims have committed misdemeanors, gone off script and so forth. It's not the point I'm trying to defend here, but by and large, the notion of adab and civility, and I use the Arabic and the English sort of translation, is very clear to see to those who study Islamic history properly. So I would be more interested in saying it like that, if that's okay.
In your book, you talk about how historians don't just study the past, but also provide solutions for the future. And what do you mean by that?
Well, let me switch the question to you. Do you think we should provide solutions for the future as historians?
I mean, I suppose we need to learn from history, of
Right.
course. But I've never thought about historians as being sort of part of this, and traditionally they haven't been part of this conversation about revival and about the future of the Muslim Ummah. So in that sense, I haven't seen historians to be a central part of that.
So when we look at Western historians, that is true. But when we look at Islamic historians, it's a little bit different. Actually, even in the 19th century, Western historians in the Christian tradition and even in the Chinese tradition were future orientated, right? Now, fundamentally, the notion of Nubuwwah, the notion of Da'wah, the Quran itself are all future orientated. So any form of knowledge that a Muslim sort of like interacts with has to be future orientated. You can't not be that. So why would history be any different? Now, if we look at Ibn Khaldun, for example, and his cyclical theory, and we'll talk about these ideas of patterns and so forth. That is a way of being future orientated. The idea that you can learn from your past mistakes, or the idea that you're going through a particular phase, you diagnose that phase so you know what the next phase is going to be and so forth. In that sense, the historian is being future orientated already by saying, me as a historian, I've seen this large tapestry beyond time and space, and I've seen this particular way that people have behaved. And now I'm going to be a thought producer by saying, okay, look, we've been here before. Okay, look, we've had these moments before. Look, this looks like a troublesome moment.
Yes.
This is how people operated when this happened and so forth, right? So in our tradition, in the Islamic tradition, very clearly, and this is one of the points I make in the book, is that Islamic history is, in fact, in my opinion, an apt sort of like critique or counter narrative to Western modernity. For sure it is. And this is the whole point of me saying it's a tradition of civility. So in that sense, historians ought to be future orientated, because the way that time operates in Islam is not linear. This is a very Western construct. So the Western notion is, now this sounds a bit outrageous, but
Yeah.
so they have this idea that time is going up and it's progressing, right?
Yes.
So progress is in this linear line.
Yeah.
And as we've got to the modern period, things have got quicker and quicker. So we'll have like the Renaissance, then the Reformation, and now modernity, and then the pre-modern period. It's just this huge gap. Like, there is no sign of the future in this way of writing history, because they will say that that's not in the sphere of what historians ought to do.
Right.
And so what you have is a space in which we call the continual present. It's always like, what's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen tomorrow? So even if we look at the politics regarding Gaza, what are the alternatives? It's like, what are the Americans going to choose in terms of what's going to happen tomorrow? The idea that you can say, okay, what can go beyond that? Can you think of the bigger picture? Is not there. So they've removed this notion of the future in many ways. Now, Islam is not like that. So what's interesting is when they became a progress-driven form of people in the way that you think, they removed the notion of decline. So decline does no longer exist in the Western mind.
Right.
So now someone like myself who's looking at America or looking at Israel and saying, that looks like a decline moment. Well, they would never believe that, because it's not part of their vocabulary even. It's gone, right? But in the past, historians who were part of a particular religious tradition, irrespective of what that tradition was, had this notion in them. They were able to then say, okay, look, we've gone away from a particular form of morality, or we're showing a particular form of excessive violence or particular level of decadence, and the next phase of that is going to lead to some sort of, combustion. And so in that sense, here now you see that historians ought to do that. So in Islam, everything is cyclical.
Yeah.
So our lives are cyclical. We came from Allah Ta'ala, we return. And it's not just the soul of the human being, it's everything in the cosmos, including time. So we have a notion of the beginning and the end. And so it goes in this way. So for us, we don't have the flat lining of time itself.
Yeah.
And the Quran is really beautiful in the way it does that. And this is why you get people like Khaldun writing in the cyclical theories, the Ottomans writing in the circle of justice, Malik bin Nabi, the Algerian decolonial thinker, writing in this circular way, because Islam, in the way that we understand time, is very different in the way that time has collapsed in on us, in the way that the Western thinker thinks. And so the Muslim historian, now with that understanding of the way that we see Qadr Allah Ta'ala and time itself, should be part of the conversation of trying to provide something different.
Yeah. In the introduction, I mentioned that a people without history are a people without a soul. Your basic contention, it seems to be in your book, is that we're looking at history in the wrong way.
Absolutely.
So what is it that we're doing wrong?
Well, what is it that we're doing right? People are gonna in the comments now go after me and say this guy is full of himself.
Yeah.
My frustration has been frustration, is the fact that I guess what the vocation is not taken seriously. And I'll give it to you in terms of a Western perspective and then my own sort of like experience. So there's a historian by the name of Gaddis. I forget his first name.
John Lewis Gaddis.
Absolutely. And Gaddis is an interesting historian from Harvard, because he was concerned that postmodernism in particular was making the case that there's no such thing as truth, and then making the case that history is just another form of fiction. And we just make things up, we put them onto paper, and everyone has their own interpretation, and there is no real philosophy or methodology that's involved here. And Gaddis makes a a very strong case that actually this is what we do as historians, right? We look at contingency, we look at continuity and change, we look at human agency, we look at context, complications, and then he also makes the case that historians have the capacity to scale, meaning I can write a chapter that's about 100 years, or I can write a chapter for 1 year. That ability to scale out that the historian has, and we actively know we're doing this, right, is important. It means that we are intellectually aware of what it is that we're trying to do in regards to the reader. He talks about simultaneity, being like simultaneous at the same time. Meaning, when I'm looking at World War One in the Ottoman Empire, I can tell you what was happening in Istanbul, Jerusalem, and Baghdad at the same time. But they wouldn't have known what was happening in Istanbul at the time.
No.
That's a privilege of me now being able to look and say, this happened, this happened, this happened at the same time. So he makes some of these arguments, and I think that they are helpful. And then he talks about, you know, space itself. We can go beyond the space and so on. And these sort of like ideas that I've just mentioned, they're lacking. Politics, for example, one of the things regarding Gaza in particular is we keep saying, where's the context? And what politicians will do is they will not give you the context as a way of absolving themselves for whatever act it is that they want to commit, in this case, the genocide. And you can see continuously those who are trying to make the case regarding October the 7th will continuously try to provide the context. Say this is not beginning of October the 7th, it happened before that. Historians are well aware of the importance of context, whereas other vocations like journalism and politics and so forth will remove the context and the complexity out. So as a historian, I'm aware of this. And, you know, like Gaddis's argument, I think, is helpful here. Now, going to the community itself, all of this, what I've just put on the table, is irrelevant. What they just want to know is, fighters conquers Istanbul. Good, bad. Give me the bullet point history. This happened, this happened, this happened. Let me pull up my mobile phone and just list through it.
Yeah.
I'm saying that's not what you deserve. Better than that is what my point is. It's not that I think I'm better than that. It's that as a community, you deserve better than that. You deserve a vocation which was part of your tradition, a very intrinsic part of your tradition, in which it elevated at least the thinkers and then became part of the manifested soul of the collective, where they were complex peoples and they understood that. Whereas now we are shortchanging ourselves because people will come up to me and say, can you prove or disprove this point?
Yeah.
I'm like, look, what are you doing? Can you come to the masjid as a token historian and just talk about such and such subject because we want to put, you know, bums on the floor?
Yeah.
And I feel like it's not just a disrespect in regards to the notion of ilm itself in regards to what we do here. It's disrespectful to the self. Like, why are you asking to learn knowledge in this way when someone like myself is telling you that there is another way of doing this?
Yeah.
And so the book is an appeal both to Muslims who are aware of this. Actually, they'll come to many of my presentations and talks and they'll say, what sort of books would you recommend for our children? What sort of curricula do you think we can create? What are the pitfalls of this book? And those are the right questions because they're aware instinctively that this corpus that's been created in this current field is counterproductive to the Muslim experience. They don't feel represented in it. And so there's a demand for it.
Yeah.
And the issue is the demand has now created a space which can be monetized and popularized. And so the monetization is happening and it's happening on a very superficial level. And so that's my critique. I never came into this for money. I came into this because I fundamentally believed that this was something that is important to the community. And so this is the conversation.
You talk there about, you know, how we're shortchanging ourselves and how the sort of awam, the normal person on the street just wants bullet point history, and you've got these YouTubers who provide them with these quick bullet point histories, and you take out a lot of the interpretation and the conversations around history, and we just want to know black and white, and I think that's probably quite true. However, are you not being a little bit idealistic when it comes to how the ordinary man or woman needs to view history? I mean, I would imagine people in your trade, academics, would have those tools and would study and would do PhDs like you and fine tune their approach to history. But you know, the local guy down my local mosque, he's not got the time to study that level of history. He just wants to know the basic facts and how that's going to impact him and maybe, yes, right, you know, how that's going to help him for the future. You know, are you calling for an intellectualization of the Muslim Ummah to that level?
Before I answer that, do you think I'm being idealist?
It's a question I ask myself about many disciplines, actually. You know, how much should the ordinary person know about political science, or how much should the ordinary person know about sociology, or whatever it may be? I mean, that's why we have specialisms, and that's why we go to people with specialism. Or maybe we get a glimpse of how much does someone know about usul al-fiqh, right? The ordinary person probably doesn't need to know too much about usul al-fiqh, but maybe an appreciation would be great.
That didn't answer the question though.
No.
Do you think? I'm not being offended. I actually
Yeah.
want to know, because I'm trying to listen to this.
Yeah.
In terms of this conversation,
Yeah.
would you, in your interaction with people, in the way that history's been done?
I feel uncomfortable being on the other side of the
That's
question.
fine, bro. This is we're brothers here, and like I said, I think we need to open up a headspace and trying to be solution driven.
I think it's difficult, surely, Yaqub, for people have finite bandwidth, they've got finite time, and find some people in the academic space or in the pre-academic space, your students, your university students, will certainly have a greater appreciation of the tools and the conversations that you're immersed in. But I just wonder whether the guy down Al Jalal Mosque, it's not named after me, but Al Jalal Mosque, my local mosque, would really have the time and the bandwidth to do that.
This is a conversation that I've had before, because I've been doing the circuit for 10 years. It's not something that I say I'm not doing anymore, although I am saying that I'm not doing podcasts anymore.
This is your last podcast.
There's one more to come, and then that's it. I'm out. But and I'm sure in the comments they'll be like, "Yay, this is great! Get him off. What does he know? He's not a real historian." So I'm not against the idea, and I'm not trying to be a purist in the sense of, saying that everything has to be high end. So, and that's in all walks of life. Whether you want to just go to your local chicken and chip shop, or whether you want to go and have a proper meal.
Chicken cottage.
Absolutely. But the point is, however, that the concern I have, and this is what I'm raising here, it's not the idea that people don't have the right. I'm making a point by using this platform to tell those who are doing what they're doing, that one, at times, what they are doing is a little bit problematic for me, because they are not being careful with the examination of the ideas they're putting out there. They are being at times quite flippant.
Right.
And we as a community have become wonderful consumers of information. But the production of ilm is not at the same equivalent. And as a Muslim, this idealism, now if we're going to use that word, and it's not something I'm offended by at all, I think there is something in Islam that encourages it. The idea of knowledge production, knowledge internalization, and da'wah to continuously be a manifestation of improvement. And so for me, it's not simply a job of facilitating the wants of the consumer market, which I will call, of what Muslims think is the order of the day. My job is to also educate and tell them what they need to know. And here, this is what I'm doing. I'm saying, if you want to have a slapstick version of history for 20 minutes, that's fine. But understand that's what you're getting. That's what it is here. So don't be then posting up on WhatsApp groups like, as pseudo-intellectuals that you've understood the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. You haven't. And so here is what someone like myself is trying to encourage in the community, which is what you're getting is baseline. But there is something that can be done that's better than that.
Right.
And so what I want in our community is those who are studying political science, those who are studying journalism, those who are doing fiction and so forth. When you see this, this is ingrained in Western culture. When you're reading Lord of the Rings, Tolkien is a history specialist. C.S. Lewis is a history specialist. When you're reading Dune, he was a history specialist. Even when you're reading Orwell, Orwell is a well-read individual regarding the history of his people.
Right.
That is in the culture, that is manifested within a particular. Now, you can say that's just amongst the elite class who are writing, but no, because everyday people in Western societies are engaging with those works, which means that it filters through. And so for me, then, the complaint is that we need to do something better than that. And that aspiration, which may not be possible by me or in my lifetime, is still an aspiration I hold for Muslims.
Yeah.
In terms of their knowledge production. I think if we want to get the type of change that we want in the world right now, then we are going to have to stand up and be counted and say that what we've been doing is just not good enough and we can be better. By doing that, you have to set yourself higher standards.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to propose, perhaps. But I'm in no way trying to say that from time to time. And look, I'll give you even more of a worrying concern I have, because nowadays people are using artificial intelligence as a way of taking their history on board. And that's concerning for me because I just told you it's an interpretive vocation. So they're taking AI history as being fact, when in actuality, that's not what history is.
Yeah.
So there's once again this idea that what is the point of history? And the point of history from the Islamic perspective, and probably we'll talk about that later, is when Allah Ta'ala talks about history in the Quran, what's he doing?
Yeah.
What's the point of it?
Well, let's talk about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you dedicate a good chunk of your book to the Quran and how it can be utilized as a historical text, maybe, or even a tool of a tool for the historian or a tool of historical analysis. Explain that idea to me, please.
So Muhammad Iqbal writes in his reconstruction of Islamic thought, he mentions history. And one of the points he makes is that both nature and history in the Quran are specific forms of sources that Allah Ta'ala speaks of, ayat, science, as a way of getting the reader to contemplate.
Right.
And that's really important because history then, from the perspective of what the Quran is pointing to, it's not pointed to bullet point history. It's pointed to contemplate over this. So Surah Yusuf, okay, for example, now when we're reading Surah Yusuf, we are contemplating over each ayat and the whole narrative that Allah Ta'ala puts forward. And in literature, this is called the creation of narrative communities. A narrative community is a community that has been curated by the author. The author writes in a particular style and creates a readership for the person who's reading that particular book. In this case, it's the Quran. So Allah Ta'ala's narrative community is the Ummah, first and foremost. People can argue it's for humanity by and large, but there is a particular way of understanding what's taking place in the Quran. And so when you're reading history in this sense, Allah Ta'ala is using these historical moments to shape your iman, to shape your character, to give you a sort of like even a moral, at times quandary, and at times a form of contemplation. And so the idea of history in the context of what Allah Ta'ala is doing in the Quran is to make you contemplate. And so as a historian now, my point of when I'm writing is what you realize when Allah Ta'ala writes about history in the various forms, is you realize the history of human beings is so vast that it leads to nothing but humility, because you realize, okay, this has been the vastness of what we belong to. And then you realize, but that requires a clarity of the knowledge giver to appreciate what's taking place here. And so when I'm reading about, whether it's the French Revolution or what happened to the people in Hokkaido in Japan, to the transatlantic slave trade, there has to be a moment in me as a human being who has to try to put myself in those shoes and go, okay, wow, what's going on here, right? That's the point. And the Quran is beautiful because, look, Allah Ta'ala in the Quran, he talks about, and those who think, and those who contemplate, and those who listen.
Yeah.
So the Quran is naturally addressing your aqli perspective, your reason, your rationale, right? It's actually encouraging, and we were talking about the awam, but look what the Quran is doing. Yeah. It's trying to elevate people by trying to change them into being contemplative people, the ones that think. And Allah Ta'ala even creates layers to this, the Muslim, the Mu'min, the Muhsin, right? In that sense. Now, so you're reading this, but Allah Ta'ala is moving your emotion. It's moving when you read Surah Yusuf. It's moving when you read Surah Maryam. It's moving when you read Surah Kahf. It moves you. What's interesting here is your emotion is not a weakness. It's part of your disposition. And in fact, imagination is part of your thinking faculty, because it's a unique faculty of insan themselves. It's we as human beings who are imaginative. You don't see cats and dogs being imaginative. The idea of being able to exercise your imagination with your rationale is what moves you. That's what the historical narratives are doing in the Quran. That's what we should be doing. And that, going back to the previous point, is not what we are doing. We are, and this is why I say we're shortchanging the Muslims to some degree. And this is why I'm trying to engage in a conversation, at least for the next generation, perhaps, to say, would you be willing to engage with the points that I'm putting on the table? It's not an attempt to belittle anyone, but just say, look, this is my frustration because this is what I've been doing. And would you be willing to do the same?
Ibn Khaldun, you talk about Ibn Khaldun in your book, and you've mentioned him in today's podcast. He's maybe a polymath, but someone who certainly knows history and talks a lot about history. Why is he so important an individual for us to be engaged with?
So there has been, I was watching a Facebook video a few weeks back where there was a critique by an Arab scholar making the case that Ibn Khaldun hasn't written anything substantial in regards to his history works in comparison to Muslim scholars before.
Yes.
Although I would say that Ibn Khaldun sort of like streamlined them out. But what he did do is he created a particular methodology of how history ought to be done for Muslims at that time,
right?
Which was very unique.
Really?
Nobody had done that before. He made the case for the importance of history being a discipline and a vocation. And he made the case of the idea of why we need to study the nature of human beings. What's the point, right? And then the idea of, as human beings, being civilizational. And in that sense, his critique at the time of Muslim scholars was based on the fact that he would say, for example, that sometimes Muslim scholars are not checking the facts correctly. Sometimes certain scholars, it's clear that they didn't have the ability to check these languages. Some of these scholars have used a particular language which is indicated a form of exaggeration. He wasn't questioning their sincerity, but he was making the case that these are particular methodological problems that can exist in the corpus of the work that we have created as Muslims. So he's not absolving us and creating this rosy picture, right? Now, where today the issue may be is the fact that Khaldun may not have been able to anticipate ideologies of the contemporary period, the ideas of Marxism, the ideas of post-colonialism, the idea of decolonialism, and so forth. But these do have problems in themselves. So one, Khaldun very clearly sets out in his main Muqaddamah, the first chapter is on history itself, and it's important. And he makes the case there's two types of history. There's the shallow history and the deep history. And he says that, we should be focusing, because there is a need for shallow history at some space.
So YouTube history.
Yeah, and look, I'm sure they're going to get the most hits, right? But then he goes, but those who are practitioners in this field should be orientated towards a more deeper form of history writing.
Yeah.
And then obviously everyone knows Khaldun's theory, which he establishes about the cycle of rise and fall.
Tell us about that, the cycle of rise and fall.
So Khaldun is of the opinion at his time of making an assessment that all states, and he was looking at particular North African nomadic states, but his theory can be stretched out to looking at the nature of all peoples in terms of how they start as, a sort of like in the beginning, there's a particular vigor of a particular idea that emerges, and then there becomes a particular strength from that, and then there's a particular level of, we become sedentary, and then a particular level of corruption, and then it leads to a cycle of collapse. And he tried to estimate the idea of this is between 111, 120 years each state. That's the longevity. Now, what's interesting is actually time is a variable that we cannot make sense of. That's in the realm of Allah Ta'ala. We all know this. And the reason why this is important is because when we're now looking at Khaldun's attempts to try to make the case of particular stages, states or civilizations go through, you can then see that he's not off the mark at times of making these particular diagnoses. And he's not wrong, because the human being, the average human being, is you're born, you're fit, you're healthy, you grow up, you're at your strongest point,
Yeah.
then you get older, weak, and then you die, and so forth,
Mm.
right? So that's the cycle of the average human life.
Yes.
But not every human being goes through that cycle. Some people die when they're young, some people can get hit by a car, and so on, right?
Yeah.
So there are anomalies that I think should be taken into consideration
Mm.
regarding Khaldun's theory.
Yeah.
But it's a good template, at least, that has been very influential. So when you have the Algerian thinker Malik bin Nabi, who starts writing after Algerian independence from the French,
Yes.
and he also writes about this cyclical theory, and he sort of like reads a lot of these sort of like French intellectual works to some degree, and then is inspired by Khaldun, reads the Quran, inspired by that, and tries to create an alternative cyclical theory. And Malik bin Nabi says the same, that the first group of communities, when they're at a spiritual level, they're at the most vigorous level, and then they get to a rational stage.
Mm.
And then after the rational stage, he would call the material stage, where people become individualistic.
Mm.
And once they get to that individualistic moment, that's when we start to see a sort of like tanking of a particular civilized force. Now, the difference between Khaldun and bin Nabi is that civilizations may have a longer stretch. So an example, the Umayyads are part of the Muslim civilization, and it continued with the Abbasid civilization and the Seljuks and the Ottomans. The British and the French were part of a Western civilizational bloc, you could say, even though they were competing,
Mm.
and then it was taken over by the Americans.
Mm.
Whereas Khaldun is talking about states themselves, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Seljuks, the Mamluks, right? So here you see that states may have a longer shelf life, whereas civilizations, because the baton can be passed on, can have an extended shelf life in that sense. And so this is the point that they're trying to make.
You also talk about how good Muslims, in inverted commas, make good historians and maybe make good producers of knowledge.
Mhm.
What is it about Islam that gives us that sharpness?
So the case would be that a good Muslim who's internalized the sort of like Aqidah of Islam and placed that within their knowledge production. So one of the biggest arguments I've made in the book, perhaps, is that our works don't have Allah on the page. And I see that as a egregious crime, perhaps. Any historical, you got Francis Fukuyama behind you, any book you read, whether it's written by a Muslim or non-Muslim, it's not giving you any indication of your salvation. It's not giving you any reflection of the one that created you. And this is problematic because, look, so for example, I've mentioned Surah Alaq before, but here I'll use in a different context. When Allah says, Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq, khalaqal insana min alaq, Iqra wa rabbukal akram, allazi allama bil kalam. The idea is that I created human beings from a clot, a fetal stage. You are at your most humble form. It reminds you of, understand what you have come from. You were just that, and I created that. Remember that. And then I am the one who taught you knowledge. I'm the one who elevated you. So I took you from here to here in terms of this elevation, right? I'm the one who taught you the names of everything. I'm the one who gave you inspiration. It's because of you, because of me, you have thought in the first place. And so imagine that the one who created you and the one that taught you knowledge and the one that gave you thought and the one that gave you life, because that's what he's speaking about here, is the one that you ignore in your knowledge production. It just irks me that that's not, and you've heard me in conferences complain about this, because my argument is that the sum totality of the knowledge that you produce, which is devoid of this central component of what it means to be Muslim, is missing. And so naturally, in your intellectual capacities and even in your soul, Allah Ta'ala becomes invisible. And if he's invisible on your paper, and then it's invisible for people now in the secular realm to see him outside, then where is he?
And why do people do this?
Well, the secular worldview doesn't give the permission to Allah to exist. That's the point. Like me as an academic, right? If I imagine started off writing as a Muslim, like Ibn Khaldun, like Ibn Ishaq, and started centralizing Allah Ta'ala on the paper and saying my whole objective, the main purpose of knowledge is for the one that created me. And my main purpose of knowledge is regarding my salvation in relation to this. And the way that I ought to write history ought to be in a way that can help me be connected to that or understand that or be attached to that is missing, then even if I'm writing about the Sharia, fiqh, ulama, khilafah, but where's the one that created me? He's not there. So it still becomes an abstract exercise, right?
Yeah.
So when in Hadith Jibreel, Rasul Sallam is asked, what is ihsan?
Yeah.
He says, ihsan is that you can see Allah even though you can't. And He can see you always. So where's the ihsan in my work? Where is the visibility of that? And so what happens, and people don't realize this, is you become desensitized and conditioned into becoming a secular agent, even though you call yourself Muslim. And that's a problem. And that's a very harsh position I'm putting on the table, because every Muslim scholar now is going to have a go at me on this.
Yes.
But my argument is that even though what we might be writing is profound, it's still the lowest form of knowledge, because the highest form of knowledge should be one of attaching the human being to the one who created them. Right? That's the objective. So a Muslim scholar now, and this is going back to your question, because I had to qualify that, is the one who's orientated with their knowledge production with that in mind. And so what happens is then when you're writing, you're aware that because you're accountable in the eyes of the one that's created you, you are extra careful in the way that you produce your knowledge. You are extra careful of your footnotes and your language, and you're extra careful in the way that you carry yourself. The idea of arrogance and hubris is not acceptable. And we are doing this as Muslims. We'll talk about Muslims of the past in very flippant ways. These are not people here who can defend themselves. So we'll go, oh, Khalid bin Walid, you know, he did this, did that. No, what are you talking about? We're not sitting at a pub having a conversation. These were people who did magnificent things for Islam. They're human beings. They've made mistakes. And there should be a particular decorum in speaking of them, because on the day of judgment, when those people say, Dr. Yaqub, forget a doctor, Yaqub spoke ill of me, and he put it on paper for people to read until the end of time, what sort of defense do I have for myself?
Yes.
So in that sense, the Muslim who truly understands in totality what the point of ilm is, and ilm is dawah orientated, it's action orientated. The idea of ilm is not just to put information on the paper, it's to, like I said, it has to be salvational, right? And the Muslim here is different in that sense, and the Muslim scholar ought to be different. And I feel that within the space of academia, not only did I start to feel suffocated amongst my colleagues who were non-Muslims, I felt like an outcast regarding my colleagues who were Muslim, because they felt that the proposal that I was putting onto the table was something which was ludicrous and not fit for the academic space. So then I said, okay, then I'm now not going to do it in that space. I'll do it in an alternative space. But it doesn't take away from the fact that I'm still intelligent. You can still write. So this is the third space I'm talking about, which is, you know, how do you do that? And one of the ways you do that is you have a good grasp of Quran and Sunnah. So when something in history happens, you can relate it to the Quran and the Sunnah in some ways, to making that case. Another way of doing that is the idea of providing morals and values and lessons. This is what we do. We provide those values and lessons, and we say what is the moral point here, both when Muslims have done something good or bad, so that you take something from it. What are the lessons that you can take from that, right? What is the aspect of contemplation over this, and what am I bringing to the table? And I think that's what I mean by the Muslim scholar here now. That this is what the Muslim scholar as an alternative needs to put onto the table. And I'm making that proposal to anyone who's listening to this today.
Can I ask you about, so you've talked about soundbite history or bullet point history, and you've said that that's not a really good way of doing history normally. And there needs to be an intellectual ascension in the Muslim Ummah. Do you have the same aversion to fiction? So Ertugrul comes to mind. You know, we know very little, as you said previously, about Ertugrul, the father of Osman Ghazi, but we do know that, you know, we know a little bit, fragments of information, but we've got, you know, lots of seasons of Ertugrul that I've seen over a period of years, and it's really, you know, given me and lots of Muslims, you know, an enthusiasm to learn more about history. Right. But I suspect you would probably say, well, apart from that little fact in you know, the first episode, the rest of it is pretty bogus, right? It's all fictional. Do you have the same aversion or problem or anger with that type of history?
You know it's not real, right?
I do know it's not real, yeah.
Actually, no.
Oh,
I think it has a place to exist so long as you recognize it is fiction.
yeah.
This is the point here. A lot of, like I said, post-colonial thinkers made the case that historians are fictional writers. And why? Because there are many tools that we are sharing with people of fiction. We're doing storytelling, narrative, so character building. We're creating a world for you. We're creating an imagination, and so on, right? So that's no different in that sense. But where we are different is that we are restricted to proof and evidence. We will say that, look, the reason why I make this case, whereas the fictional writer has no need to do that, and nor should they have a need to do that. I just explained to you that the Quran addresses your imagination. Imagination and creativity is part of the disposition of human beings. That should be part of our culture. So I have zero problem with fiction. In fact, the argument I make is that people who are historically grounded and have a good historical consciousness can write fantastic fiction, because all forms of knowledge require a repository. So when you're watching the Game of Thrones, I don't know whether you've watched that or not, but the idea of the Game of Thrones was that when he was writing, he was using many moments from his historical consciousness in terms of what he was reading about English culture and so on, right? When you're looking at Japanese anime, for example, the idea of something like One Piece is that he's using historical references in Japanese culture, which young Japanese kids can resonate with in that sense. When you're looking at the Battle of Algiers, the idea is that that's actually not a documentary, it's fictional. In fact, what happened in Algeria was far worse than what was in that documentary, right? But the Battle of Algiers was really interesting. Why? Because it was inspirational to people like Lucas, who did Star Wars. Star Wars was fictional, but Lucas, in a conversation with James Cameron, makes the case that the rebellion are representatives of the little people who were taking on a technological empire like the British and the Americans. People were aware of that. When Lucas put out Revenge of the Sith, this was the complaint by the Republicans who were supportive of the Bush administration because they just invaded Iraq. Avatar, James Cameron, then takes his leaf from his book and does exactly the same.
Yeah.
In that sense, you know, and they used to say like the PLO, the Black Panthers, the IRA, they took inspiration from the Battle of Algiers. Fiction is a powerful medium of moving people in regards to, once again, contemplate. What I would argue, however, is the Muslim fictional writer should be aware of this fact. One, what is the purpose? Are you just creating this for entertainment? Because part of the Western culture is this sort of like commodity of fiction and the way it's come close together. But the idea, I would say, as a Muslim is maybe we should do it within our own prism, which is one, we want to tell beautiful stories and even maybe challenges perhaps of the past and curate it in a way in which we can speak more truth in the fiction than we can times in the academia and give these correct, I mean, look, writing includes metaphor, analogies, and narrative, and we can do that. So I'm not against Arturul. My problem was not with Arturul the show, was the fact that Muslims took it for being fact, because once again, we've become accustomed to thinking that history is fact, and it was a TV show. But I mean, what it inspired in people actually did a wonderful service for me.
Yeah.
Because then people want to study Ottoman history, and the first thing I did is tell them that the show is not real.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yaqub, is there a methodology from Islam in the way we do history?
I think there was a methodology from Islam in the way that we did history.
Yeah.
I think looking at 2024, I think as Muslim scholars who are both who have taken the sort of like tools from academia and have the ability to go back to our tradition, I think we need to try to fashion something again from our process. So like, for example, I told you about Orientalism and Marxism. So Weber was the one who coined the idea, the Oriental despot. And he's the one who coined the idea, the sultanism. It's an idea that stuck in the Muslim mind, but it was a construction by Weber himself in the way that he looked at the East as one block, and in the way that he looked at Muslim politics in particular, right? But the way that the Muslim politics actually worked was very different than what he was proposing, but we've internalized that.
Yeah.
So you can see, like, for example, Marxist writers who at times may be sympathetic towards Muslims are still very antagonistic towards Allah Ta'ala. Of course they are, they reject it. So the key is that how do we write in a way which is in conformity which can firstly take the tools that we've like Gaddis puts on the table. I think those are universal ideas of selectivity, of scale, and so forth. The idea of complexity, the idea of context, the idea of contingency, and so forth. Right. So one of the things I didn't mention to you was we said that in Islam they have these cyclical theories, right? And I thought, but I've coined this idea of from Badr to Uhud. And this idea that in Islam we've had Badr moments and Uhud moments continuously.
Yeah.
And contingency moments are really interesting because you have a cyclical theory where you're trying to anticipate something, but you can't anticipate a contingency moment. So as a historian, I can't use my faculties to tell you there's going to be an earthquake tomorrow.
Yeah.
I just can't do that. I can have a discussion with you about the decline of the American empire, but I can't do that. I can't tell you who's going to win in the war that's currently taking place. I don't know the outcome of that. And that's interesting because we have these contingency moments like epidemics, like natural disasters. Nubuwwah is an interesting moment because Allah Ta'ala directly intervenes by sending a prophet to try to change the disposition of a group of people. And then there's war literature. And Western historians write extensively about war literature. The war historians in the West are, there's so many of them. And they shape policy on this, Both Bernard Lewis and Kissinger were, heavily invested in this sort of way in terms of curating foreign policy for the American administration in regards to what to do in the region. And what's interesting about war is it's a culmination between the qadr of Allah Ta'ala and human agency, to the point that we really don't know what the outcome is going to be, right? And so in Islamic history, then I started looking at these moments, right? And what's interesting is you have Badr and then you have Uhud. And Badr has a particular quality to it in the way that Islam speaks about it. And then Uhud has a particular component and quality to it. And like why these two issues are so different. And throughout Islamic history, then I say we have these like Badr and Uhud moments, right? So I say, for example, 1071, the Seljuk defeat of the Byzantines in Manasket, Anatolia, is, you could say, is a Badr moment. And then in 1099, the Crusaders take Jerusalem, Beit al-Maqdis. That's an Uhud moment. And then another 18 years later, you have Salah ad-Din at Hittin, 1181, roughly. That's a Badr moment. And then 1258, 70 years later, you have the sacking of Baghdad. You have an Uhud moment, right? And then you have Murad Hudavandigar, who, the Ottoman Sultan, who makes it all the way to Kosovo. The Balkans come under the realms of the Ottomans, the Badr moment. And then, decades later, you have the clash between Timurlane and Bayezid, and you have your Uhud moment. And then Fatih's conquest of Constantinople. But then you have Muslims being kicked out of Spain. And there is some lessons to be learned from this, in this sense, in these ups and downs. What's happening here, right? In terms of what is it that we're looking at in terms of these contingency moments? Well, what is it that we take from this? Not only the morals and values, but you also realize that this is a continuum. And one of the interesting things about Muslims, which is different, I guess, Iblis said to Allah Ta'ala that he wanted to be alive until the end of time, or Satan. Right? And Adam alayhi salam was generational. He was going to pass knowledge down generational. And this is a unique facet of human being. And the Muslim tradition has strongly taken that culture on board of being generational. Even though we go through these various stress moments, these various moments of violence, of outside intervention, of genocides and so forth, but the ability to continue to survive is because we are generational as people. We keep passing down that notion of civility, right? In that sense. So why is this important? Okay, so now 1071 is Mansikat.
Yes.
And then 1099 is, look here, is Crusaders. And then Hittin happens here. But during the Battle of Manzikert, the Seljuks are able to institutionalize the Nizamiya madrasa system, Nizam al-Mulk. You have Juwayni and Ghazali.
Yes.
You have the emergence of a intellectual renaissance. They recognize Ghazali's alive during the Crusaders. He dies in 1111. So there's a recognition in the Muslim world, even though they couldn't stop 1099, but the movement of knowledge production, of the awareness and so forth continues. Now, what do you get in about 1144? Imaduddin Zengi, the Seljuk Bey, who's driven by this knowledge production, who's shaped by this knowledge production. And then what do you get? Nuruddin Zengi. So Imaduddin defeats the Crusaders at Urfa, and then Nuruddin Zengi defeats the Crusaders at Bilad al-Sham in Damascus and Aleppo. And then hitting is possible with Salahuddin Ayyubi. So what's the Badr moment? Is the Badr moment Salahuddin Ayyubi's 11, or is it Imaduddin? And so what you realize is these ways of looking at long jury history is you can see these moments. Wars are like this, and knowledge is a lot slower, like this. So right now, today, what we're seeing in Gaza, there's a sense of helplessness in terms of the inability to do something. But we still produce solutions that are driven for now, and they should be future orientated for that future that we cannot see, so that it can look different. And this is why knowledge production is so important, that even though this is devastating, and even though we're trying to, from the rooftops, shout as loud as we can to try to stop this, and there's a unwillingness by the various forms of leadership to stop this. But then as a knowledge producer, I still have to be future orientated, because that's the culture of Nubuwwah. Going back to now the method of writing history, right? So as a Muslim then, going back to everything I've said, this is what we need to do. So what is the idea that I propose onto the table is I make the case of Hadith Jibreel, which is the Hadith of pedagogy, which is the famous Hadith in the Nawawi collection where Jibreel alayhi salam comes and he meets Rasul sallam in a gathering. And he sits knees to knees with him. So imagine
So he comes as a man.
And he sits knees to knees with him. And everyone's just like, who's this guy who's come from the desert, not a speck of sand on him, looks perfectly clean and so forth. What's going on here, right? And the idea of knees to knees is important because in terms of teaching relationship, what has Jibreel alayhi salam done? It's closed the distance. What does the internet do? It creates distance. This is why, once again, about the bullet point history is a concern I have, because teaching is about having closed the distance between the ones you are teaching, because you are a reflection of the knowledge that you're producing. Now, Rasul Sallam knows who he is. So when Jibreel alayhi salam asks him the question, he goes, okay, what is Islam? Rasul Sallam is aware that I'm not the one being tested here. We together are teaching everybody who's sitting in presence. Actually, the hadith is interesting because it's not just teaching them, it's teaching every single person, including you and me, who are reading that hadith about what is Islam. So then Rasul says, Islam is La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. And then pray 5 times a day, zakat, hajj, and fasting. So it's a very simple answer, but it's a very profound answer. What you learn from here is that they're using a Q&A format to reinforce a particular idea for the audience that they've already gone through. They've already been taught by the Prophet. But this Q&A is being done here. And what's interesting is Rasul says it in the most simplest form. So on the one hand, I'm making the case that your writing should elevate society, but it should be written in the most simplest form so that even a regular person can understand it. So as an academic, once again, I've put all these ideas on, but the point I'm making is that when I'm writing, I'm aware that it shouldn't be beyond the scope of people's understanding. And the second point of that, what is Islam, is ibadah. You're here for worship, right? So what's important here is that the Muslim needs to understand the shahada. What is the testimony of faith? And 2, that what is your worship? And then he says, what is iman? And he says, iman is the belief in Allah, the belief in the angels, the belief in the books, the belief in the prophets, and then qadar of Allah Ta'ala and the day of judgment. Now these 2 points are really interesting for the historian, because how in the historian I should show some way of one reflecting for a Muslim audience the idea of iman. We shouldn't feel ashamed of the idea that we believe in angels, that we believe in Nubuwwah, that we believe in Allah. These are the iman components. So I had a student once ask me, how do I convince someone of angels? I said, this is the issue of iman. This is why they need to be convinced of shahada first before you can bring that to the table, right? But then there's the idea of the qadr of Allah Ta'ala. This is an important point. On the paper, at times the agency of human beings is missing, but the agency of Allah is missing in the narrative and the way we tell it. We don't make the case that, and that this is the qadr of Allah Ta'ala. We should be highlighting that to the reader so that they're aware in the lived experience, and then in the written experience, it confirms it. At the moment, what we're confirming is the absence of it.
Yes.
And then the last hour, and the last hour is important, and I'll come back to that in a second. And then he says, what is ihsan? And like I said, he said, ihsan is like you can see Allah. Okay, then we need to see Allah. We need to put calligraphy of Allah's name. I need to make my lived experience in the way that when you see me, you think of Allah, right? And in the paper, we're not doing that. So as a historian, these are the points I'm making. Now, Jibreel alayhi salam then says to him, so tell me, when is the last hour? And Rasulullah says, the one who's asking the question knows just as much as the one who's answering. Meaning it's the realm of Allah knows only. So when Ibn Khaldun is creating these theories, time is an issue that we can't really know. And the point of me as a historian is not to try to give you when will something end. I can't, that's in the realms of Allah. But I understand a particular pattern that I can explain to you perhaps, right? In that sense. And then what does he ask? He asks Rasulullah, okay, give me some signs. And then Rasulullah mentions particular signs. And those signs are important because what it tells you is that Rasulullah is future orientated. So then the historian ought to be future orientated, this particular form of methodology. Now, then when Jibreel alayhi salam leaves, what does Rasulullah do? He turns to his best student, Umar bin Khattab, and he says to him, do you know who that man was? And he goes, no, Rasulullah, you know better than me. He did the Q&A. He asked him a question. And he asked him the question in an environment of absolute confidence and interaction and love. And the humility of Umar bin Khattab. He says, I don't know, you know better. And then he's Jibreel alayhi salam. And they didn't turn around, everyone in the room, and go, what are you talking about? They went, okay. And so that hadith itself, in terms of methodology, tells us a lot about how the Muslim ought to start to curate their knowledge production as a historian, perhaps, in terms of giving meaning to Muslims, because this whole hadith is known as the sort of like the mother of Sunnah, understanding it. It's sort of the heart of how we produce knowledge, why we produce knowledge, what's its purpose. And so I think this is what Muslims ought to start looking at, their own tradition and how it tells us and informs us about how we're producing this knowledge. And so this is what I want to do. I want to put Allah back. And it's interesting. What is Islam? Allah is at the center of it. What is Iman? Allah is at the center of it. Or what is Ihsan? Allah is at the center of it every single time. And so for me, my appeal is not to tell Muslims who are in academia not to write academically, because they may just cut off halfway through this podcast and just start freaking out.
Yeah.
They can produce that form of knowledge. Just it's Hudaybiyah, for example. When the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was done, and then they said, why did you put Ar-Rahman in there? Take it out. And Rasulullah says to Ali ibn Talib, okay, take it out. And he goes, no. Why? Because Ali ibn Talib and the Muslims understood what that meant. Just like what Western academia does. They understood that by taking this out, by extracting this, you are making the creator invisible. And then he says, take out the word that you're a messenger. We don't accept that. Now, Hudaybiyah was a contract, if you can call it, but it was a temporary measure. But knowledge production is permanent. So the Muslims who were frustrated by that, I agree with that sentiment, that you can write your books in academia and so forth, but there has to be equally a culture of knowledge production, from our printing houses to our syllabi, to our curricula, to the way that we teach, that's centered on this type of intellectual tradition. And that for me is not at the same level. And it's frustrating because we have the resources, we have the human capital, we have the minds. It's not like it doesn't exist, but we're stuck in this current framework of the status quo. And I'm saying now, looking at October 7, saying, you know what? We need to change. We really need to be braver. And we have to be braver with our relationship with Allah, fundamentally. And there can be times where you can be selective in what you want to put in your work, but the general knowledge corpus for the next generation. Otherwise, they're going to become accustomed to writing knowledge where Allah is invisible, and I don't accept that, and I refuse to accept that. And so, for me, the highest form of bravery then is not the critique of Western academia, or the critique of colonial studies, or the critique of it's the egregious crime of not permitting Allah. So, and power does this. Power will not permit another form of power to be visible on its form. And how dare we, as human beings, become so arrogant in assuming that we can remove the one that created us from our knowledge production. So this is where I stand now, and this is my position, and I'm going to go on that 100 miles per hour.
Dr. Yaqub Ahmed, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, bro.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair. Why has the Ummah not moved so far?
Is the Ummah dead? The Ummah is controlled by tyrants who don't care about Gaza. We need to change our thinking. They don't have any strategy.
Yeah.
They are not sincere towards their Ummah.
Yeah.
They care only about themselves. They don't care about the killings in Gaza.
Where does the emphasis have to be? At the top or from the grassroots?
The Muslims are waiting for a leader. The number of those who graduate in Sharia with Sharia degree every year is 50,000. Where are they? Every week there is 1 million Jum'ah khutbah. Where is the effect of that? It's not enough to cry about it. We have to do something. Okay, let's think now, because I'm a thinking Muslim.
Gaza has been a hurtful experience. The liberal West that had always told us that they believed in a moral philosophy had betrayed their so-called high values to protect their own imperial interests. This may not be surprising to many of us. The past 25 years of the war on terror has illustrated to the Muslim world what really makes the West tragically successful: the systematic use of organized violence and an ability to mask this through the sometimes overt and sometimes subtle use of tools of propaganda. Their hypocrisy is laid to bare. But what of the Muslim Ummah? This year we saw the passing of a milestone, 100 years without a central leadership. The last Ottoman Caliphate, with all its faults, remained a global force and acted as a shield for the Ummah. So why have we declined to such a degree? And it seems our leadership is inept and our Ummah has not moved over Gaza. So what can we as Muslims do about this? We're joined today once again by Dr. Tariq Suwaidan. Dr. Tariq Suwaidan is a prolific writer and speaker and trainer, and in many ways has brought much needed intellectual thought to our modern age. Dr. Suwaidan, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. It's a pleasure to be with you and your audience, and thank you for inviting me again.
Well, Dr. Suwaidan, we've got a really interesting conversation to be had today. I know, alhamdulillah, you put a lot of effort and thought into the subject of the Ummah and its state today. Now, Dr. Suwaidan, if you don't mind me saying, you are a veteran of the Muslim activism scene, of the Muslim Da'wah scene. We've seen nearly 10 months of horrific scenes over Gaza. Why has the Ummah not moved so far?
طيب, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. And thank you again for inviting me and being with your audience. And thank you for bringing these thoughtful ideas. And Thinking Muslim is a great idea to move the minds, because that's what we need today. Before I talk about the Ummah, let me talk about Gaza has shown the failure of humanity. And especially the West.
Yeah.
Double standards. They condemn violence and they provide millions, billions to those who commit violence. They are with the innocent and they provide the bombs that kill these innocent. So it's a huge failure, not only for the Ummah, it's a huge failure for the whole of humanity. Now, back to the Ummah, the Muslim Ummah, we have to describe it correctly, Jalal. Is the Ummah dead? Okay.
Yeah.
No, the Ummah is not dead. But the Ummah is very, very sick. And we have been sick gradually. For the past 400 years, we have been sick. And this sickness, sometimes when you see a sick person, sometimes the sickness is so bad that you are not sure whether they are alive or not. So you have to check their vitals to ensure that they are alive. So the Ummah is in that situation. Alhamdulillah, this has changed a little bit. Your generation have not seen this. Our generation have seen it. And before 1967, the situation was much, much worse than today. Much worse. And you won't believe that even in Islamic thought, and this is your subject, that simple things, simple ideas that are taken for granted today, at that time, they were considered revolutionary.
Really?
When we say Islam is fit for all times and all places, that was revolutionary at that time. If we say politics is part of Islam, we were considered kuffar. That, yeah, actually, I remember when I went into the masjid when I was 17 years old. Wallahi, everyone turned. They were surprised. There is a young man entering the masjid. Today, you see, the whole situation is different.
Yes.
The masajid, mashallah, is full of the youth, and there are thinking Muslims, and there is a lot of projects that are great. I have seen so many, mashallah, and especially our generation in the West, that the Muslims in the West, mashallah, are just outstanding. And the young people, mashallah, every one of them is having a project or part of a project. This is not available in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So alhamdulillah, yani there are major changes. So why did the Ummah did not move? Because the Ummah is very, very sick.
Yeah.
And the Ummah is controlled by tyrants who don't care about Gaza. As a matter of fact, they are willing to have peace with Israel just to stay in power. So we have tyrants, we have traitors that govern us, and that is the situation with the Ummah today, and that is why the Ummah did not move. If the Ummah finds the correct leadership that will motivate it, the Ummah will move, and the sickness will gradually go away, inshallah.
So do you think it's really a leadership issue? Because some would argue, even if we had good, strong leadership, the Ummah's sickness is so broad now and so inset that the Ummah wouldn't move even with a great leader.
I have a deep study on this issue. And this study has continued. I started this study in 1986. And I kept thinking about this for all of this time. How can we revive the Ummah? So let's start with the sickness.
Yes.
It is not leadership only.
No.
There are 5 major sicknesses that the Ummah faces. The first one is the problem of behavior. Our behavior is not Islamic. Islam tells us something and we do something else. You can see this very clearly in our behavior, even in the streets. We are not organized. We are not, unfortunately, Muslims are clean. This is not Islamic. Behavior between a person and his family, you see so many problems, violence towards women and children, etc. So we have a problem of behavior. Even our behavior with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet You see so many who do not pray. You see so many who, even when they pray, they just do it because it is an obligatory thing. There is no relation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their prayers. So we have a problem. We have a problem of behavior. The second major problem that we have is that we are backward. We have been backward. We are still backward in education. And I'm talking about the Ummah. I'm not talking about specific country. Education and health and military. And we are backward. So, and the World Competitiveness Report that is published yearly shows that Muslims are not even in the first 20 countries, we are not there. And if you look at the last 10 countries out of 140, you'll see 7 Muslim countries in that category. So that's not Islam. The third major problem that we face is the problem of effectiveness. We are not productive. We are not effective as individuals, as organizations, as companies, as countries. We are not as productive as the advanced world. So we have a major problem on that issue. The fourth major problem that we have is in the matters of thought. We are still in some matters of thought, we have major problems. For example, even in Islamic movements today, rarely you see women in the leadership positions. That is because of tradition, because of 400 years of backwardness. We are still affected by it. You don't see this in the Western world, but you see it very clearly, even in the Islamic movement. That is backward. So we need to change our thinking, the way we look at at Islam and the world. And finally, the problem of leadership. We have a huge problem of leadership. Yeah, this because I've written 10 books just on leadership. We have a huge problem. The science of leadership is not well advanced in our ummah. It's not widespread, and leadership training is really, really weak. And thus, we have a problem in leadership in all levels, not only on political or the highest, in all levels, even on the leadership of companies, of households, we have a problem. And it's in all areas of life. It's not only politics. So you see, the problem with education is leadership. The problem with health is leadership. Yeah, and because I'm an educator and you are an educator, do you know that the spending on education in the Middle East per capita is more than it is in Japan? But where is the results?
Right.
So yes, we have problems not only in leadership, we have problems in all of these areas.
I noticed, Dr. Suwaidan, when you and the fascinating points that you've raised, and I think these are really important areas that we need to provide thinking about. But I noticed you didn't mention the external factors, Western interference here. Now, if we go back to the subject of Gaza, we know that there is behind Israel, there is the United States. The United States provides 70-80% of its military power, and beyond that, the United States provides a diplomatic and political cover. And in relation to the Muslim world, you can almost suggest that at least the leadership, but if not all of these areas, are impacted by just the manner in which the West has configured these Muslim countries to serve its own interests. So how much weight do you give to foreign interference in this schema?
We separate when we analyze, because that's what we do when we do strategy. When we do strategy, we look at four areas. The first one is the present. And these factors that I mentioned are a quick analysis of the present. And that is only on the challenges side. There is another side of studying the present, and that is our capabilities or core competencies.
Right.
Now, so the four major areas are, in short, looking at the present, looking at the future, looking at the plan to move from the present to the future, and looking at the resistance that will stop us. So foreign intervention does not fall under our internal analysis.
Yeah.
It falls under the resistance that faces.
That's really interesting. Now, you've given a lot of thinking to this. I just want to raise an impediment, or at least an excuse that many people make about the current situation in Gaza. So I've noticed that there is an uproar, especially on social media, against the Muslim rulers and their inaction, and sometimes action in the wrong way over Gaza. But there's always a counter argument which suggests that maybe they're being strategic. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah is used quite a lot. The Prophet ﷺ signed an asymmetric treaty with the people with Mecca, and maybe there is a grand plan here in the leadership where, similar to the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, there is a strategy, a strategic mind. I mean, what would you say about this?
Well, I wish. I assure you that is not the situation.
Right.
I assure you. Okay, we know who are we ruled by. No, yeah, they don't have any strategy.
Yeah,
they are not sincere towards their ummah.
Yeah,
they care only about themselves. They don't care about the killings in Gaza.
Yeah,
and they are against the resistance that Hamas and the others are doing.
Yeah.
So that is the truth about it. Now, using the truth of the Hudaybiyah as an excuse is a good way to escape blame.
Yes.
But no, yeah, it's not. See, the truth was done in a way that would guarantee that the Muslims have the right to go back and get their rights. Scholars have talked deeply about what happened in Hudaybiyah. Let's assume that we will take Hudaybiyah as an excuse, because I'm a historian and also I have a full study of the Seerah. Most scholars agree on the following: that if you are going to have a truce, it is not allowed to have a truce more than 10 years.
A temporary truce.
A temporary truce, and most of it specified in 10 years. Now, whether it's 10 years or not, that's an issue of difference among scholars. But what is not being disputed among scholars is you cannot have a permanent peace. You cannot. This is not allowed in Islam. Now, our rulers are for normalization of relations and permanent peace. So, no, we're not talking about sincere people.
Yeah. Back to the subject of decline, I came across an interesting work by an American academic who suggested that, like the Roman Empire or like previous empires, the Muslim Ummah was once a great empire, but today it's really about managing decline. Like the trajectory is downwards. You seem to suggest that there is a possibility to U-turn and to excel and revive once again. What makes you think that?
Okay, if we want to draw the curve, I have done this, a full study on this. The curve goes like this, ya akhi. You jump at the time of the Prophet and the Khulafa al-Rashidin.
Yes.
The upward direction of the Ummah continues in the Umayyads and the Abbasids. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that they are pure. It means that the curve in general was upward. The Ummah was strong and getting stronger. And science and math and even Sharia studies and so on, all kinds of sciences and humanities were well developed during that time. And the Ummah became the leader of the whole world on this, and this is well known. So we continued the upwards. Of course, there were declines during this period, but when you look at the curve of a nation, you do not look at battles.
Mm.
You look at the curve, meaning that you could lose a battle, you could win a battle, you could lose a certain civilization factor, you gain it again. It doesn't matter. You don't look at these small points. You look at the curve in general.
Yes.
So the curve in general was moving upward. Now it comes the Ottomanis. The Ottomanis, the curve continues, but starts to decline.
Yeah.
But it's still going upward. And during the time of Muhammad al-Fatih, Sulaiman al-Qanuni, etc., it continued to go upward. That continued exactly, ya akhi, until 998 of Hijrah. What happened on that year? The third siege of Vienna.
Yes.
The Ottomans failed. Since that point, ya akhi, we have been going downward.
Mm.
What does that mean? We're losing most battles, we're losing most lands, and there is no addition to any civilization, no sciences, and the Sharia itself becomes no creativity. See, I studied the books of that time. You'll be amazed, ya akhi. Let me tell you what you'll see at that time. You'll see, for example, in the Maliki fiqh, you'll see people writing summaries and summaries and summaries of what has been written in the past.
No original thought.
Until you reach Mukhtasar Khalil, which is a very small booklet, very complicated, but it does summarize all matters of fiqh. All matters. You can see in one sentence maybe 100 rulings. Wallahi, ya akhi. Amazing, yani. And then somebody comes and writes the explanation of Mukhtasar Khalil. And then somebody writes a commentary on Mukhtasar, on the explanation of Mukhtasar Khalil. And then you'll find somebody writing a commentary on the commentary. Wallahi, ya akhi, until you have 7 commentaries. And then you have somebody summarizing the whole thing again. So like it's like an accordion. You go up and then you squeeze and you're up. And there's nothing new. Nothing new. That's what happened for 400 years. Now, are we still going down? And the answer is no, we're not.
Right.
We have already reached the bottom in 1967. When we lost Al-Quds, if you lose somebody sacred, something sacred, whether it's democracy, whether it's a holy land, etc., and you do not revolt, then you are either dead or really, really sick. So we lost Al-Quds and we did not revolt. But what happened, ya akhi, after that? Something amazing happened. After 1967, suddenly the whole Ummah wakes up. Before that, there were areas of awakening here and there. But after 1967, it's like a slap. Wallahi, suddenly, you see the Islamic movement or organized Islamic work all over the world, from Indonesia to America, all over. And I went to America at the end of 1969 and stayed 17 years in America. And it was the golden time for our Islamic work at that time. So we were not living in the same conditions of almost dead before 1967. We became awake. Now we became awake as young generation, but our leaders are the results of the area and the era of colonization.
Right.
Those who colonized us, they left, but they left behind rulers who follow them and follow their interests. Now, I want to say something. and you are a political thinker. Ya akhi, we have the new generation have to understand. Even in our rulers, even with all that you see, things are moving in a upward direction. How? After 1967, the rulers followed the colonists completely.
Right.
Today, they are not sincere to the Ummah, but they do not follow the West or the East 100%. They follow, but not 100%.
Yeah.
In the 70s, in the 80s, it was 100%, 90%.
Yeah.
Now I would estimate that they do follow 30, 40%. That is a huge improvement. Even in our traitors, we have a huge improvement. We have to look at the positive side always. So, for example, you see a ruler that does not listen to America and makes relations with China. This was unheard of for a long period of time. So the Ummah is reviving, and we are moving upward since 1967. Now, because of the dark situation that we see all over, people don't see it. But we as analysts, we do see it. So please have trust in your Ummah and believe in this revival of the Ummah. The Ummah is going, inshallah, to be revived very soon.
Is there anything to learn from the prophetic method when it comes to reviving the Ummah today?
Of course. So again, this is a subject that I studied deeply. I wrote 6 volumes on this. It is not enough to read Seerah in a plain way. So the way I teach Seerah, I call it Seerah in colors. Because people teach Seerah in black and white.
Yes.
So what does that mean? Let me give you an example. And think with me, since you're in the thinking Muslim. Let's think together.
Yes.
How to look at Seerah, so we can see how the Prophet ﷺ thought and how he acted. We all learned that on the 5th year of the message, not Hijrah, the 5th year of the message, the Prophet ﷺ sends some of his companions to Ethiopia, to Al-Habasha. And he says, go there because there is a just ruler that does not do injustice to anyone. So they go there. Why did he send these companions? Now, the books of Seerah, the teachers of Seerah will tell us, because they were oppressed. That's what we were taught.
Yeah.
Okay, let's think now, because I'm a thinking Muslim. So let's think and answer these questions together. The first one who migrated, the first one was Uthman radiallahu anh, with his wife Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is, by the way, in the hadith in Sahih Muslim.
Yes.
So it's not only in books of Seerah. Uthman was never oppressed. He was never touched. Why? Ruqayya was never touched. Why would they migrate? Another question. Who is the leader of the Muslims in Al-Habasha? Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. He is the son of Abu Talib. Why didn't the Prophet ﷺ himself migrate? Because he was under the protection of his uncle, Abu Talib. Now, Abu Talib would protect his nephew, but would not protect his own son. Doesn't make sense. And it is proven that Ja'far was never touched. And many others, by the way. Let's take another question. If it was for the reason of oppression, let's think. Okay. 83 Muslims go, 83 of the best Muslims. Zubair ibn al-Awwam, Uthman ibn Affan, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet, etc., etc., etc. They stay in Habasha 15 years.
Yes.
Not a single person becomes a Muslim in all of Al-Habash, except Al-Najashi. Why? It doesn't happen even in the West today.
Yes.
15 years, not a single Muslim. There's something wrong. And fourth question. The Prophet ﷺ starts the migration to Al-Habasha. So people already go. And then he looks for somewhere else. What? Why does he look for somewhere else? Why doesn't he continue the migration to Habasha and sends more people and he goes himself? Why does he look for something else? Final question. The Prophet ﷺ migrates to Medina, starts his state in Medina. Now he has 83 of his best companions in Al-Habasha.
Yes.
Because they were oppressed in Mecca. Now there's no oppression in Medina. He rules Medina.
Yeah.
Why doesn't he bring them back? The trip from Habasha to Medina at that time takes 5 days. Why do they stay 7 more years?
Yes.
And they do not come until the Battle of Khaybar. And this is well known. The Prophet ﷺ saying, لا أدري بأيهما أنا أفرح بفتح خيبر أم بقدوم جعفر. I don't know which makes me happier, the conquer of Khaybar or the coming of Ja'far. So, conquer of Khaybar is on the year of 7 of Hijrah. So they stay 7 more years with no oppression. So let's think, huh? So you're asking me, can we learn from the Seerah? Of course, if we think. If we take Seerah as events, no, we do not learn. Yeah, the reason for this is written in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومِ. The Romans have been defeated by the Persians. What does that mean? Let's look at the strategy. Look at the whole picture. The Persians were ruling the east, Persia. They were ruling the northeast, Iraq. They were ruling the south, Yemen was under the Persians. And the west is Christian, Ethiopia. Northwest is Egypt under the Romans. In the north is Syria and surroundings under the Romans. So there was a balance of superpowers around Arabia. And then suddenly this breaks and the Romans are defeated. And the Persians now control even the north. They took over Syria. And they took over Egypt. So the only place for Muslims to escape if the Persians take over Arabia is the West. So he sends them to the West. The proof to this, when does he bring them back? When? The 7th year of Hijrah. Something happened. He left them there 7 years, and then something happened, and he brings them. Scholars of Sirah don't talk about what happened. Why? He brought them back. What is that? That is just an event. Why did this happen? Ya akhi, on the 6th year of Hijrah, what happened? In the 6th year of Hijrah, Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, the truce of Hudaybiyah, which was unsure that it will be settled or not. Will Quraysh hold to their word and do not fight the Muslims? So he makes sure that now everything is under control. Suddenly Islam explodes in numbers, explodes. And now the Prophet ﷺ said something. Now we attack. We do not defend. So now Islam becomes powerful and a new stage of Islam happens. So now he sends to them and he said, come back. So what do we learn? We learn to have a strategy. We learn to look at the bigger picture. We learn that even when we are weak, it doesn't mean that we do not see the future and plan. So that's what we learn from the prophetic message.
That's really fantastic. So in essence, we have to think about not the present only, think about the Ummah from a broad strategic perspective. Back to that original question I had. I mean, we had the Prophet ﷺ, who was the leader, effectively, of the Ummah, the political and the spiritual leader of the Muslim Ummah. Today, I see that the absence of people like that at the top is what's creating this failure to provide strategic leadership from below. I mean, where does the emphasis have to be? At the top or from the grassroots?
Time has shifted, ya akhi. Time has changed. The Muslims are waiting for a leader, similar to the Prophet ﷺ, or to much a lesser degree, like Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Muhammad al-Fatih.
Yes.
That today doesn't make sense.
Why?
Okay.
Yes.
As if the question is, we are all ready, and the only thing that is missing is a leader. It is not that.
Yeah.
If we look at the whole picture, then we see that I told you we have a problem in 5 areas, not only in leadership. And today, we do not need a leader to move. We need institutions. Institutions are much more stable than leadership.
Right.
Because you might one day have a great leader, few years later, you might have a weak leader. But if you have institutions that are ruled democratically and they can change leadership easily, then they will replace these weak leaders and they will revive themselves continuously. So I do not see, I made this full strategic plan for the Ummah. And in the whole plan, there is no place for one leader that will revive everything. We are looking for leaders, not a leader.
Yeah.
And we are looking for leaders in every area of life, not a leader or leaders for each area of life. Meaning that in education, we are not waiting for one person to lead this. We are waiting for hundreds to lead this. So if everyone leads his or her institution and improves their area, then the Muslim Ummah will revive. So in my vision, I do not wait for a leader. That is a huge change in the present situation.
There is a conversation about how to bring the Muslim world and Ummah together beyond just the personal or the civilian aspects.
Yes.
And many cite the example of the European Union as a method or as an example, as a model to reunify slowly and gradually Muslim countries through cultural, through political, through economic unions. How far do you accept that model?
I have looked into the strategic vision, and I imagined that we can reach a strategic vision in 20 years.
Right.
While strategic intent, which is the Islamic civilization, I do expect to take 50 to 80 years. Now, strategic vision, Islamic vision, I specified two major goals. The first one is to be competitive, meaning that the world today compete on who is first as a country, who is first in education and health and military, etc. We are out of this competition.
Yes.
My goal is to help my ummah to reach a strategic vision at that point where we are competitive. At least some of us are in that part of the best 10. So that is one goal. The second goal is not unity,
Okay.
but it is more of a confederation. I do not, of course, our goal is unity, but I'm talking as a strategist. Can we reach it in 20 years? And my answer is no. We can reach it maybe in 50 years, but in 20 years, we can reach this confederacy. What does that mean? That we can have some kind of agreements, and I specify them as follows. First one is the defense agreement, like the NATO. Second one is a foreign affairs agreement, like the European Parliament. The third one is a monetary agreement, like the euro. The fourth one is to open borders between our lands, like the Schengen. And the fifth one is to have a united criteria of judgment or assessments, like the ISO. That will unify education, will unify the health, etc. Now, if you look at these five, ya akhi, it means that we can unite kingdoms and republics, doesn't matter. We don't have to change what is going on today. We don't have to crush systems. And it's even more than that. Today, most people cannot see Iran, for example, part of the Ummah, because they are Shiite, because they cause trouble here and there. We can have a full discussion on this if you want.
Yes.
And that is true. But with this vision, Iran continues to be Shia and be part of this. See, in the European Union, there are kingdoms, there are republics. There are small countries, there are big countries. There are several languages, there are several religions, etc., etc. They did not change all of that, but they became strong by being united in these major areas. That is a model that we can follow, and we can do it better than them.
Yeah.
Because we have a united language, which is the language of the Quran. We have one religion. We have one history, etc., etc., etc. So we are closer to be united, and we can learn from their model. They took 77 years to reach that model. Now we have the model, and we have the bylaws, etc. So we can probably do it in 20 years.
Yeah.
So that is my vision in that area.
Can I ask you about, back to the conversation about Gaza?
Yes.
And I know we spoke about this quite a lot in our previous programs, but one dimension I haven't asked you about, and it has a connection with your vision, is maybe the poor quality of Muslim scholarship or Islamic scholarship at the moment. There is an issue of political co-option. These scholars often have too close a link with governments.
Yes.
But also there's an issue maybe linked to your civilizational schema. There's a problem with just thinking when it comes to Muslim scholarship. I mean, how do you rate current Muslim scholarship?
I told you that when we do strategy, we look at the present. They gave you some some analysis of the present. We look at the vision and the strategic intent, and I gave you some ideas about this. And then we look at the resistance. Who will resist us from reaching that? I specified 5 powers of resistance. Of course, number 1 is dictatorships. Second is corruption. Third is corrupt scholars.
Really?
Fourth is the foreign intervention in our countries. And number 5, which is the biggest and most dangerous, and that is Zionism. So back to the scholars. Scholars, we can divide them in general into 3 categories. Sincere, working scholars, those who work really, truly for the revival of the Ummah. And there are some, but there are very few, unfortunately. Now, the majority are not corrupt scholars, but they are also not scholars that move. So these are, I say, I will even not call them even scholars. These are graduates of Sharia. And these are the majority. Yeah, I don't know that you know this, but the number of those who graduate in Sharia specification with Sharia degree every year is 50,000. Where are they? They have no effect. Do you know, Akhi, that every week there is 1 million Jum'ah khutbah in the Muslim world? 1 million, huh? That is the least estimate. Where is the effect of that? So this is the majority. Now these are most scholars, sheikhs, imams, etc., in a small masjid here and there.
Yes.
And they have nothing to do with civilization, nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with what's going on in the world. They lead the prayer and answer some personal fatwa issues, and that's it. Of course, there are a few scholars who aligned with the dictators. And they are a few, by the way. They are not the majority. They are the few. And they are the most dangerous.
Why?
Because they pave the way for the dictators in the name of Islam. They even allow killings of du'at by their own fatwa. So I'll tell you a very nice story. Al-Hajjaj, I don't know whether I mentioned this before to you.
No.
Okay. Al-Hajjaj was a big dictator in our history. At his time, he killed 250,000, which is equivalent to 25 million today. Huh? 250,000. So one day, he ruled Iraq, Persia, and all the East in the name of the Umayyads. So one day he was in his palace, and his attendees were the ministers and the merchants and the corrupt scholars, but some good scholars attended. And one of them was a Sahabi. He was a very small Sahabi at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. He became very old, 120 years old. So he was attending this meeting. Al-Hajjaj said something that was invalid, untrue. So one of the corrupt scholars said, Subhanallah. So this Sahabi said, I had never imagined that saying Subhanallah will be a sin until I saw it today.
Wow.
So again, this is my answer to you. These scholars say Subhanallah in that sense to these dictators. They do even more than that. I have heard one of them on TV saying the following to the ruler of his country: kill these leaders of the Islamic movement. and their blood is on me. Okay? So, that is an answer to you. That's what they do. So they are really, really dangerous. We have a problem, Yafi. We have a major problem. We cannot convince our ummah not to follow these people. We cannot. The ummah respects the scholars. Especially, this is a scholar in an official position, mufti, etc. So people respect scholars and listen to them.
Yeah.
And they will not listen to somebody like me telling them, don't listen to somebody like that. Because to them, that is a major scholar. While Sudan, to them, is not a major scholar, because that holds a position. So what do we have to do? We have to train a new generation of scholars who don't learn only Sharia. They should learn three things. They should learn Sharia deeply. They should learn skills of affecting people. What are the skills that you can use or I can use to affect people? Media skills, authoring, writing articles, ability to have an interview.
Yeah.
They were not trained on such things. So that's why they're weak. But there is a third thing that they should be trained on, and that is values. Ya akhi, those scholars who supported the tyrants, do they lack knowledge?
Probably not.
No. What do they lack? Values. They don't lack knowledge. So no matter how much they study Sharia, and if we are heard by some of our young men and women who study Sharia, no matter how many books you memorize by heart, and no matter how deep you are in Sharia, that will not protect you from supporting tyrants.
Yeah.
What will support you is having a deep faith and deep adherence to values. That's what will support you.
Yeah.
And if you are not trained on that, you'll be weak. So we need to retrain our new generation of scholars. And we should help them become major scholars by giving them chances. See, how do you become famous? Today is social media. So we should give them platforms to make them known. This is the way we replace these corrupt scholars.
Dr. Suwaidan, the pain that we feel from Gaza is immense.
Yes.
And there are some scenes we see on a daily basis. And, you know, our heart is out of control. We feel a very deep sense of demoralization almost. You talked there about values. Can you remind us of the Islamic values that we need to hold on to in order to weather this really painful episode?
Yeah, I see TV like you do, and I hear news like you do. But I trained myself not to be moved by emotions. Emotions are important, but emotions alone is not a good thing. You feel pain, that will cause psychiatric issues to you.
Depression.
Yeah, depression, and you can sleep at night, and you cry all day, and so on. You will not live a normal life.
Yeah.
And with that, not only we lost you, but you lost us because we cannot benefit from you.
Yeah.
And thus you become an ineffective part of our revival. It is a major training in strategy, that if you want really to do strategy, you leave emotions aside. You cannot have strategy while you're an emotional person. So I feel the same pain, but I do not act this way. The moment I see more killing, immediately I would think, what can I do to stop this killing and punish these criminals that do these killings? That's how I think. So feeling a pain, if it will move you to do something, it will move you to donate, it will move you to make more prayers, it will move you to write, whatever, do something. But just feeling pain and crying will cause depression and will benefit nothing from you. And Gaza will benefit nothing from you. So this is the way we should think about it. But I think about it even in a deeper sense. So I do follow, 7 news channels every day. And I'm talking American news channels, not only the Arab news channels.
Yes.
So I know the details of what's going on, even in America. And I do, one of the things that I follow are the news from inside Israel. What do the Israelis say? What do the Israeli TVs say? What do the columnists say in Israel?
Yeah.
Ya akhi, you do not imagine the pain they are going through. So yes, we are in pain, but they are also in huge pain, huge. And if we talk only about the economy, these 10 months have destroyed their economy. And if you go read the details, but it destroyed their economy, not only now. It will continue affect them for the next 10 years. Their analysis is that they have lost $400 billion for the next 10 years. Now, all the American donations in the past 10 years, all of it, huge, but all of it is 320 billion. So they will be in pain. They are feeling pain in every area of life. And for the first time, Israel has shown its true face to the whole world. And people have seen the savageness. They are savages with what they're doing. They're killing, and they enjoy destroying the water tanks or whatever. What is the joy in destroying a water tank that would support people to drink? So they do it willingly, and they laugh about it. Leave aside killing thousands of children. So the first time they have shown their true face to the whole world. For the first time, countries have cut relations with them. UK itself is reviewing its stand on Gaza. That was unimaginable. That criminal justice have taken a stand against them, etc., etc. So many things. So yes, we are in pain, but they are also in pain. And ya akhi, if the war continues, Gaza will feel more pain. Muslims will feel more pain. But if that pain, sometimes pain is good. If that pain will move you to do something. Gaza have been in pain for 16 years, ya akhi, under siege for 16 years. Nobody felt it. Now when they moved, people start to cry about it. It's not enough to cry about it. We have to do something. So if that pain is moving us, that's good. If the pain of Gaza is bringing the attention of the world, that is good. If the pain of Gaza is bringing Israel down, that is good. If the pain of Gaza is showing the true face of the savage Israel, that is excellent. So let's look at the positive, not only the negative. So that is how every time I see the pain, wallahi ya akhi, every time, this is how I think.
Yeah.
What more can I do? Please, yeah, our audience, that is how you should think.
Yeah.
When you see the pain, it's not enough to cry. Let's give an example. We are almost at the end of August. Schools will come back soon. I wish, I hope for the new generation to revive the camps in the universities and demonstrations immediately. The moment schools come back, you should be ready to do it. Another thing that's coming soon, the anniversary of October 7.
Mhm.
So you have now about a month and 1 week to plan for that anniversary. You should not wait until that moment to do something.
Yeah.
You should be ready to do something. This is how I think. Don't let pain bring you down. Let pain move you.
Jazakallah khair. It's really been a pleasure speaking to you today, Dr. Suwaid. Thank
My
you very much.
honor, my pleasure, and inshallah, that had benefited your young generation and move them to do something to revive the Muslim Ummah. Alaykum as-salam.